I had read about Datura in Carlos Castaneda's book, The Teachings of Don Juan, and could not believe that the plant was hallucinogenic. At the time, I was very naive and had no experience with drugs of any kind, and almost killed myself that way. I broke off a whole branch of a brugmansia tree, and I took it home where I made a little salad out of it. I chopped the leaves, mixed it with some olive oil, and I started eating it. The taste was awful, very bitter. Thankfully, I only had 2 or 3 mouthfuls, and then I sat down and started reading this Sunday paper. About 20 to 30 minutes later, I started seeing the whole room in red color, as if I was looking through a sheet of red plastic. I tried to focus on the Sunday paper's classified, and much to my horror, all the news were dated of the late 1800s and were about slaves being sold and traded. The paper looked very authentic, sepia tone and all, and no pictures like modern papers have. Then I turned the page and I saw one picture of a female slave whom I somehow knew was myself, attached to a torture pole, being whipped and bleeding. When I tried to focus on the picture, the slave turned her head and looked directly at me. I freaked out and left the apartment and took a taxi to my grandmother's house. She sent for my oldest uncle, who was a shaman, but he wasn't home, and I just returned home by myself. That night, they took me back to see my uncle, and he didn't find anything unusual with me because I never mentioned I had eaten the leaves of brugmansia. So I went back home and laid down in bed next to my husband and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, probably about 1 a.m., I wake up and turn around, and instead of my husband, I find a skeleton lying down next to me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and woke up my parents, and would not stop screaming until they came and told my husband to leave the room. From that night on, I could not look at my husband without seeing him involved in red color, and somehow I felt like he had a demonic presence in him, and I would always scream until someone would come and take him out of the room. The next day, my parents took me to a doctor who happened to be a Japanese neurologist who was famous for dealing with teenagers and young people having psychological problems. I don't know what he prescribed, but I remember reading the labels and telling my parents that I was not going to take that stuff because it was probably too strong for me. They insisted though, because it had been prescribed by a doctor and it was supposed to stop my wandering around. Still to this day, I do not know what was prescribed to me, but I got 100% worse and ended up in a psychiatric hospital about 6 weeks later. During those 6 weeks, I had several hallucinations about the devil, and I would feel his presence very close to me, sometimes licking my face and ears, other times whipping me with his tail, but I never saw a face, only the body from the waist down, which looked like it belonged to an animal, black, shiny fur, and 2 goat-like feet. One time I was lying in a hammock in my mom's yard, being closely watched by her and my aunt, and I got up all of a sudden, saying that a horrible storm was approaching, and I could feel the wind, the dust, and very heavy rain fall all over me, while I felt totally blind. My mom and her sister walked me back to the hammock and made me lie down, and then I could not move anymore. I was blind and paralyzed. They decided to take me to their spiritualist church in the evening, and I remember being led there totally blind, but after about 5 minutes of being there, I started regaining my vision and my movements. When people who knew me since I was little came to talk to me, I never answered them and just begged my parents to take me back home. Then my mom took me to one of her prayer partners' house for praying, and I asked for a glass of water, and when the lady came back with the water, I just threw the whole thing on her face. Every time she looked at me earlier, I could see her twisting her face and her eyes in mockery, so that was my way of responding to that. She held me by the arm and walked me to a big picture of Christ hanging on our wall and said a few words in the sense that whomever was trying to take over me had to know that Christ was the Father. I remember regaining consciousness immediately after that. Then on a Sunday, one of my brother's friends came to visit, and when I looked at her face, the flesh started falling off as if it was rotten, and I was terrified, and again screamed at the top of my lungs until someone took the girl away from the room. I remember having the same hallucination when looking at a magazine cover, and also when looking at myself in the mirror, which made me avoid mirrors for a very long time. In the meantime, my parents kept taking me to the neurologist, who kept drugging me more and more, totally oblivious to the descriptions of my parents about my condition. At this time, I had been practically locked up in my parents' home, but anytime anyone came to visit, I would try to escape and would run straight into traffic. I guess I was trying to kill myself. Then for a while, the hallucinations stopped, and I was allowed to go back to my own apartment with my husband. But one night, he woke up and found me on the window of the 6th floor apartment and took me down and back to my parents' house. I remember clearly waking up in the middle of the night and hearing a very insistent voice telling me to climb on the windows to jump off. I did what the voice was telling me to do, not without much hesitation, but the voice was stronger than my will. I remember that it was cold, and I decided to grab a blanket to cover my shoulders before climbing on the window, and apparently, that's what startled my husband and made him wake up and grab me before I jumped off. Back at my parents' house, I went on seeing people's flesh fall off their faces, or them turn into apes right before my eyes, and whenever that happened, I wanted to run down the street to escape that vision. One day I did succeed and run away, but when I got around the block, I saw a lady that owned a cafe in my parents' neighborhood and decided to sit down and have a chat with her. My mom had come down the street trying to catch me, but when she saw her brother's car approach, she asked him to go after me. They found me sitting at the cafe peacefully chatting with the lady owner, and they put me in my uncle's car and took me back to the neurologist's office for one more visit. By this time, I was equating the doctor's office to a place linked to death for some reason, and I remember walking down the entrance with my uncle holding my arm, but the minute I opened the door and stepped into the office, I saw myself alone in an empty room with a coffin lying in the middle of it. When I looked inside of the coffin, my uncle was lying in it, dead. I screamed again and took off to the streets. The doctor's office was in an older neighborhood and had 6 feet high iron gates with spikes around it. I remember climbing the gate and jumping on the street with my uncle trying to grab me. I ran right onto the busiest traffic, and when I was about to step into it, I saw a guy standing up on the curb. He looked back at me, and he told me to go back to my uncle. He had a very assertive smile on his face, so I decided to obey him and just turn around and went back to my uncle, who was coming running down the street trying to catch me. After this incident, my parents decided to take me to see a psychiatrist. Then I knew that that would be the end, and I fought against it. They had to have 3 or 4 people grab me and lock me up in my dad's car for the 1-hour ride to the psychiatric's office. When we arrived, I realized that my husband and my brother were also meeting with the psychiatrist, and as soon as the meeting started, I just stripped right in front of everybody and went from person to person, asking them if they wanted to fuck me. In my mind, I had been taken there to be fertilized by the devil, a la Rosemary's Baby, so I just decided to go ahead and be done with it. I thought that maybe if I seduced one of those people, my own husband, my dad, and my brother, that it would somehow keep me from being raped by the devil. The psychiatrist told my parents to lock me up, and they did. He told them I would be in for at least 6 months, and after I went in, the hallucinations continued on. One time, I looked out of the hospital's window and saw a river of fire coming down the concrete steps of the property next to it. And in the middle of all the fire, there were all these mad dogs, barking and being pushed down the river. Simply horrible. Neither the doctors nor my family knew what I had taken, but somehow the one in charge of me decided to do a detox, and that saved my life. 2 weeks later, I was out of the hospital, and it took me at least 2 years of therapy, without any medication, mind you, with an orthodox Freudian doctor, the same one that had me detoxed, for me to go back to having a normal life. I agree with one of the people that described their experience, that this herb aims to kill, and after regaining consciousness, I heard several stories of people killing themselves after drinking the tea. I guess I was extremely lucky to come out of the experience alive, because I felt that if I died under the effect, that my soul was going to be in the devil's service to act on other people who took the herb. It was more or less like this other guy describes below, that it seems like once you die under the effect of Datura, you belong to an evil group and you can never free yourself again. By the way, my mom said that right after I was put in the hospital, my uncle, the shaman, had a session for me in the middle of the forest and told her that she could rest assured that I would be out of the hospital in no time and that I would be safe after that. The year is now 2000 and I still haven't fully recovered from that experience. Whatever the temptation is, watch out, don't do it. Had it been now and in America, I would have sued the neurologist who prescribed all those drugs and never had a clue that I was intoxicated. It could have cost my life. The plant alone has claimed many lives, and it hasn't been funny. So please, don't go there. Revisiting this experience is somewhat difficult for me. The few hours I remember are some of the most frightening and potentially deadly I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing. I grew up in a very conservative, wealthy family, and by my early teens I found myself experimenting with pot, mostly out of desperation for my friends. By the time I was 17, I was regularly getting stoned and loving this new world I discovered. I was meeting people and spending times in places that my parents would have died had they ever found out about, and I loved it. I loved the independence, and I loved thinking I knew better. By the time I was about 17, the same group of friends that introduced me to pot had started talking about this thing called moonflower. Desperate to prove myself to these older, cooler guys, I told them I'd love to try it, and we went on a search throughout the town to hopefully find some growing. We found a plant and took a few pods to one of the guys' homes. I don't remember how much I took that night, but it wasn't much. I remember going home pretty soon after and coaxing myself into thinking I was starting to trip out. I'd never done anything but smoke weed, so I didn't know what this was even supposed to do, but the little information they had given me led me to believe it was some kind of hallucinogen. That's literally all I knew about it. After that failed night, a few months had gone by, and I found myself at the local lake with some friends hanging out on the beach. I noticed some gigantic moonflower plants growing nearby, and upon closer inspection, I noticed that there were several huge spiny pods growing all around it. I picked 4 or 5 of the biggest ones and headed home. They looked kind of cool, so I lined them on top of the TV in my room and kind of forgot about them. A couple days later, my entire family came down with their wives and children. I'm the youngest. We're a pretty close family, so we spent the day hanging out and just having a good time. Little did I know what was coming that night. It was about 3 in the morning and I was bored with nothing to do. I'd spent all the time I could on the computer and there was nothing on TV, but I soon remembered the spiny pod sitting on top of my television. I was in a pretty daring mood and I didn't want another false start, so I took 2 of the pods upstairs with me and cut them open in the kitchen. I completely emptied out the contents of both pods and poured a glass of my favorite juice, then proceeded to pour the contents into my mouth where I chewed them up to a pulp and swallowed the mush with a few gulps of fruit juice. It's been 6 years since that night, but as I sit here and remember it, I'm actually gagging as I think about it. I sat in the kitchen for a few minutes, then remember walking downstairs into my bedroom. I sat on the bed waiting for something to happen, and after 10 minutes or so had passed, I started thinking it must have been another dud. I sat up to walk into the bathroom, and as I got up, I noticed a strong sense of dizziness come over me. It's working, I remember thinking. I walked into the bathroom with a really strong urge to urinate, but as I stood over the toilet, I noticed that I couldn't go. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't start to pee. By this time, the effects were almost doubling every minute or so, and my mind was becoming more and more cloudy. I had to pee so bad, and I remember that every time I got into hot water, I had a hard time not going. So hey, why not turn on the outside jacuzzi? Genius idea, I thought. I started walking out of the bathroom, and as I caught my reflection on the way out, I stopped and stood there staring at myself, not recognizing the person looking back at me. I sat there moving my face around and feeling with my hand as the effects came washing over me faster and faster. I never felt anything like this before, and I was kind of liking it. By this time, I'd started to teleport around the house. I have absolutely no memory of walking around, I just remember appearing in different rooms. I opened my eyes and I was in my bedroom looking into the mirror, getting more and more confused about who was looking back at me. I teleported to the jacuzzi controls and turned it on. The jacuzzi takes a good 20 minutes to heat up, but I just remember suddenly being in my swimsuit and trying to walk outside again to the warm jacuzzi. I remember having the hardest time trying to lift my legs to walk by now. I got to the edge of the jacuzzi, which has about a 1-foot high ledge to step over, and I thought I was lifting my leg high enough to step over the ledge, but as I went to take my step, I noticed my foot was only a few inches from the ground. I bent down and lifted my leg up with my hands, and suddenly I was sitting down in the warm water. I was finally able to urinate, and I was just sitting there in a complete daze. This is where I started to pass in and out of consciousness. The best way to explain it is to say it's exactly like when someone holds my neck and passes me out and I start coming back from it. I get this weird static noise in the background like from a television that slowly fades away and I'm back to normal again. It was even stranger because the noise of the water and jets mixed in with the static and it all blended together. This is the scariest part. I'll give a brief explanation of the layout of our backyard to better convey the situation. Basically, the pool and jacuzzi sit about 25 feet away from the house, and the house faces a steep drop-off that looks out over the city. There's homes on both sides of ours that are separated by a high brick wall. I was situated in a way that I was facing the house with my back to the drop-off and able to see the brick wall to our neighbor's house to my far right, about 50 feet away. Remember, this is now about 3:30 to 4 o'clock in the morning, so it's pitch dark. I remember looking over at the wall and seeing a dark figure appear. It was more of a black shadow than a person, and it slid up over the wall and started crawling over to me. The moment the first figure started over the wall, it was followed by 3 others that looked exactly like it. I followed them with my eyes as they slid up and over the yard until they slipped into the water in front of me. Then darkness, now static. I can't see anything, but I can hear the static getting louder and louder. It's building up more and more until it morphs into the sound of the jacuzzi jets. I look up and the figures are gone. Darkness again. The beings are back. I'm talking to them, but I don't remember what about. Now, the static is building up again until it morphs into the jets. I look back up, and they're gone. Darkness swallows me again, and the beings are back. Then suddenly, I come back to, and I'm in the house, standing in the downstairs living room dripping wet. I start walking to my bedroom and I notice the light is turned on. I didn't leave it turned on, I think to myself. I walk in, and to my absolute horror, my entire family is there. They're all staring at me with looks of disgust and surprise. My dad approaches me and in a demanding voice says, "What are you on?" I desperately try to answer, "Nothing," but my mouth won't work. I finally get something close to nothing out, and he answers back, "You're slurring your words so badly I can't even understand you. Now tell me what you're on." I scream back, "Nothing," and turn to my bed. My mom is sitting on it and I lay down next to her. She places her hand underneath me to feel my heart, and I hear her say, "His heart is about to beat out of his chest." I get scared and in my final words utter, "Moonflower. I took Moonflower." They ask in confusion what Moonflower is, and I point to my TV. I raise my hand and yell, "Moonflower," as I point at the pods on my TV. Then darkness. That was my last memory. Suddenly I wake up and my mom is holding me. I'm sitting on the couch in the office and I see a figure charging toward me. I start batting at it with my hands while screaming, and my mom holds me down and says, "Alex, it's just a hallucination. Settle down." I come back to and look at my arm. There's a bandage over my veins near my elbow and a hospital ID tag around my wrist. I ask what's going on and my mom tells me I've been in the hospital for the last 24 hours. Apparently, they rushed me to the hospital after I passed out on my bed, and I went crazy when I got there. I was punching the nurses and swearing at everyone, so they had to restrain me on my hospital bed. I started to seize, so they gave me the stuff that's supposed to knock you out, but it didn't work until they gave me 10 times more than what's normally required. My entire family really was in my room because apparently at some point I walked into the room my sister was sleeping in and mumbled some gibberish, so she went to my parents and woke them up, which woke everyone else up, and they all wanted to see what was going on. To this day, I honestly think I was starting to cross over to the spirit world and I was looking at actual spirits. Maybe they were looking over me. If I had fallen into the pool, I would have unquestionably drowned. If I had walked over the edge of the yard, I would have fallen to my death. The fact I didn't kill myself that night is a total miracle. Moonflower, Jimson weed, or whatever, is a terrible weed. I will stay away from it like the plague. I literally had no control over my body once it kicked in. I could have murdered my entire family and I would never remember it. There isn't enough money in the world to make me want to try it ever again. When I decided to take this drug, I was in a state where I'd do anything to get high. Although the experience itself wasn't too bad, after doing research on how dangerous this drug is, I don't ever want to do it again. My mom also looked after someone in intensive care who developed a psychosis after using Datura. It started at my mate's house. I made up a tea solution with 1.5 flowers and let it sit overnight. When I woke up, I downed the tea on an empty stomach. The first effects I noticed was a dry throat and mouth, so dry I couldn't even swallow saliva or drink water. It felt disgusting. I started to feel nauseous and ended up throwing my guts up. Once I'd thrown up, I felt better, but strange. I decided to lie down, and as soon as I closed my eyes, I experienced some strange CEVs. They weren't seen with my eyes, but vividly in my mind, like if someone was to visualize an object. The difference was I had no control over what I visualized, so it was like I watched a movie played out in my head. I saw some awe-striking things with lots of detail and color. As I was lying on the bed, one of my mates started talking to me. I replied and we had a short conversation until I opened my eyes and noticed he was at the other end of the room. Everyone was staring at me because I'd been talking to myself. I shouted, "How did you get over there so fast? Wasn't I just talking to you here?" And he said no as they all laughed. I found it quite amusing and started laughing too. This continued to happen as I closed my eyes again. It was like I'd fall into conversing with them. Without realizing it, I do it unconsciously, forgetting it was fake and had happened previously. As soon as I opened my eyes and realized that no one was there, I'd realize I was talking to myself again. Very strange. I felt much better now. The dryness of throat and mouth had disappeared, and I no longer suffered from any nausea, so I decided to walk into town with some mates. I don't remember much until we got into town and decided to catch a bus home. We jumped on the bus, got our tickets, and sat down. I thought 2 other mates were sitting in the back as I was down in the front, so I shouted out to them as they shouted back. I later found out that my friends were not on the bus, and I was just embarrassing myself. The bus drove on its route until it reached my street. The driver drove right past my street and I shouted, No, turn right, you missed my house," expecting the driver to deliver me to my house. I realized I had to get off at a stop and wondered why I'd shouted at her. I got off at the next closest stop and began my walk home. I have no idea why I decided to go home whilst on Datura. Dumb idea. On my walk, I was alone, but I kept having conversations with my friends in the same way I had the conversations on the bed. I'd be walking, and I'd hear someone talk to me and reply to them. Then, as I turned to look towards the voice, I'd see them for a split second until they vanished into thin air. I believed I was with around 4 or 5 people when I was alone the whole walk. I decided that all my friends had invisibility cloaks and they were playing tricks on me. Every time I looked at them as they disappeared, I got really mad because they wouldn't stay visible, and I shouted and cursed at them. At one point, I was trying to pull trees out of the ground believing they were hiding underground. I also searched through people's gardens looking for where my friends had gone. I passed quite a few people while undertaking these strange acts and got very strange looks from people. I ignored them, thinking my actions were perfectly normal. On the walk home, I continuously found a cigarette in my hand alight, and I'd put it in my mouth and take a drag, but not feel any smoke in my lungs. I'd look at my hand and notice that the cigarette had disappeared. I also felt and heard my phone vibrate and ring in my pocket. I'd pull it out, answer it, and started talking to someone on the phone when I noticed it went silent. I'd look at my hand and realize that the phone was gone. This kept happening quite a few times, and no matter how many times it happened, I was unable to realize it was a hallucination until after it had disappeared. Once I reached home, my mother opened the door. I introduced my friends, asking if they could come in for a bit. I went into the kitchen and told my invisible friends to make themselves at home and ask if they were hungry or thirsty, all while my mom watched in disbelief. I remember my mom asking where my friends had gone, and I looked around noticing they had disappeared. I told her they were probably under their invisibility cloaks or hiding in the bushes outside. She sat me down and asked what drugs I had taken. Not realizing how fucked I was, I lied and said none. She ended up telling me she'd called an ambulance, thinking I had gone insane, which caused me to run away as fast as I could from her house. I ended up walking back into town and was talking to my invisible friends as I walked through the main street. I decided to start walking back to my friend's house, thinking I was with 2 other people the entire time, and I was furious as they kept disappearing on me. I reached my friend's house, and by then, the drug had worn off. I kept asking my friends if they had been with me at all today, and they said no, they'd been at home. Confused, I realized I had been delusional on Datura all day, and told my friends as they laughed at my strange conclusions and experiences. Datura was very strange and very confusing. Whilst on the drug, you don't know what's real and what's not, and it puts you in a dreamlike state where you can accept very delusional beliefs. Although the experience wasn't frightening, it was very confusing and frustrating, and I don't plan on doing it again. I should probably write this all down before I forget, as a lot of it has already left my memory. I have always been interested in Delerious and already have experiences with nutmeg and DPH, but Datura is what has really piqued my interest. I brought this up to a friend of mine who says he knows where some of those plants are growing. We walk over there and harvest some leaves to smoke to test the waters. Next time, we are going to harvest the seeds and use those to hopefully go further. 12 o'clock. Me and my friend B walked down the street into a nearby forest with the leaves we harvested and a pipe. We also brought cigarettes in case we needed to take the edge off. 12:30. B has already smoked his dose. He doesn't say anything other than, "It doesn't taste as bad as it smells." I bring the pipe to my lips and light. I waited till the plant matter was glowing red, and then I took a slow and deep drag. B was right, the taste was very faint. However, it was starting to burn, so I coughed the smoke out. As soon as I do this, I feel like I just shrunk down by 3 feet. B says, "God damn, I feel high already." "Me too," I reply as we start heading back to meet with another sober friend, C. 12:45. On the walk back, I start to feel like I'm being grabbed and pulled down, but at the same time very light on my feet. B won't shut up and keeps bursting into laughter. I start hearing a faint mumbling in the background, and I have this horrible feeling I'm being watched or followed, so I take a cigarette and struggle to light it in the rain. 1 o'clock. I finally get the cigarette lit right as we near C. Another friend of mine drives by and stops on the side of the road to say hi. He is with his mother who is against smoking, and I had no idea I even had a cigarette in my mouth and didn't realize it until B called me out for it. I take a long drag from the cig. Ah, sweet nicotine. I can feel the anxiety melt away with every hit. We finally meet up with C, who immediately notices something and asks, "What the fuck are you guys on?" We try to explain to him what Datura is, and he replies, "So you smoked a random plant out of the ground? Dumbasses." It rains even harder as my vision starts to fog. 1:15. The slightest noise will cause me to jump. Not the intensity of DPH, but still enough to be an inconvenience. I see people walking on the other side of the road who aren't actually there, and dogs running into the middle of the road only to get hit by a car and vanish into thin air. If I stop walking, the ground under my feet dissolves, and it feels like I'm walking on stilts and I'm about to clip into the ground. Sometimes I do just that and realize that my feet aren't touching anything and I have no legs. The ground is up to my waist. I can't tell noises real from fake anymore. The high itself is very comforting though, so I try to enjoy the euphoria and not get distracted by the delusions. C tries to light a cigarette, but can't because of the rain. 1:30. We stop at a table just outside of Sunripe to eat. I look at myself in the reflection of the window. It stares back at me and calls me a bitch. I insult it back, but then I feel this sense of danger and apologize before it attacks me. C says I'm fucked. B just feels tired at this point, and I can't recognize anyone including myself and my phone camera. Everything just looks off. I try to listen to music, but I keep hearing fast footsteps as if someone's charging at me, so I take my earbuds out immediately. C leaves. 2 o'clock. B is perfectly sober at this point. I think he had the same amount as me, but I don't know. I do have a very low tolerance to deliriants. With DPH, I only need 200 milligrams to give me full-blown hallucinations. I decide to take the city bus back to my house and say goodbye to B. The bus ride is a blur. It feels like I walked through the bus straight into my front door. It felt completely natural at the time, however. Looking back, I'm very lucky I actually got to my house. 3 o'clock. I thought I was coming down. I was wrong. I call over yet another friend, D. I text a group chat I'm in asking if I smell like cigarettes, thinking they could answer me. I am extremely tired at this point. I look over on my wall and I see something crawling on it. Spiders. Cue blackout. 6 o'clock. I'm not in my room anymore. I'm in a restaurant with D eating fish and chips. The room looks very small and it's closing in on me. Everything looks very off, like your vision on high-dose edibles, but more sinister. I think we had a conversation about murder. Another blackout. 7 o'clock. I'm back in my room, spiders galore. I feel like a Pablo Picasso painting with all my limbs having improper proportions and having like an undersized hitbox, if you get what I'm trying to describe. Blackout number 3. 8 o'clock. I'm in a car with my mother and possibly brother. I can't tell who's talking, him, her, or the other peculiar man in the back seat. I try my best not to audibly answer anything. He says not to raise any suspicion that I am tripping. It's very difficult. On the ride to wherever we were going, I kept seeing people running across the street that when I looked back vanish, and very tall figures within the trees in the distance. The man in the back seat is trying to kill me. 9 o'clock. I remember watching TV. I don't remember the show, but there are bugs all over the walls. The man in the corner won't stop staring at me. I'm hearing whispers from the kitchen. 11 o'clock. I try to sleep. I can't relax over the breathing coming from the foot of my bed. I could feel its breath. Itching. Lots of itching. Can't sleep. I'm dying. I've died multiple times already, and I'm going to die again. I hope this is the last time. I walk outside. It's daytime. There's a girl talking to me. She looks dead. She tells me that I'm next. I snap out of it. Back in my room, she's standing in front of me. Huge bugs everywhere. None of this seems to bother me anymore. I have multiple more strange occurrences like this, but I do not remember them. 5 o'clock. I think I finally fell asleep. Vivid nightmares. Not scary ones, just disturbing. They don't bother me. Day 2, 11 o'clock. I feel exhausted, still seeing spiders and shadow people. 8 o'clock. Visuals subside, memory still very hazy. Auditory hallucinations continue. I'm actually able to sleep this night. Day 3, 10 o'clock. I think I sobered up around this point. Vision still blurry and mild tinnitus, but other than that, I'm back to normal. And yeah, that's it. I actually found this really fun despite what it may have sounded like. I do like horror and seem to have a strange liking to disturbing things, so that may be a part of it. Hopefully next time I can go deeper, fully dive into this other world. TLDR. First experience with Datura. Pretty enjoyable but disorienting and disturbing. Hard to tell you're even tripping until you have a moment where you temporarily snap out of it. After smoking a bowl one day in the park, my buddy Cracker finally showed me and my brother a Datura tree. It was a normal day, after lunchtime, and we were all feeling pretty good. The white flowers were big, but I still managed to eat 4 of them, as vile as they were. This is where the remapping of my brain began. The next few hours I spent in the hot sun. Within the first 3 hours of taking the flowers, I could hardly move my limbs. I was experiencing a slow tranquilization. Shortly after school got out, I went home for a nap. Already I was experiencing the dreamy state associated with the poison in Datura. I passed out at some point, and then I'm quite sure I had to get up and leave my house. My father told me that I was basically sleepwalking. I was walking around Berkeley with no clue in my head of where I was or what was happening to me or what I was on, but I did always have a cigarette. I can't be sure what happened between the point where I was passed out and the point where the cops picked me up trying to pick up an apple I hallucinated. They handcuffed my dissociative ass and told me to sit down and wait for the ambulance. The cops picked me up a good 2.5 miles away from my house. I've read a book about Datura since then, and it's called The Devil's Weed as an immensely powerful ally, giving me the most ability to manifest hallucinations. It invigorates my body, and I guess that's how I got so far. What really sucked was that I had only boxers, a t-shirt, and 1 shoe. The ambulance took me to the mental hospital. At the mental hospital, I was still tripping hard. After I signed lots of forms and such, they dosed me really good with some pills, antipsychotics and tranquilizers probably. I didn't sleep for the first couple nights. I kept thinking there were people hiding in the curtains on the windows of my room who were talking about me, and then my brother and an ex-girlfriend would come from under the curtains, and somehow we escaped the hospital and got into a car and parked in an alleyway. At this point, I got out of my bed in the mental hospital room and opened the door, which opened into the hallway of the hospital. They told me to go back to bed, so I did. This happened again many times, like a recurring dream. The bed I was sleeping in appeared to be made out of dead, or even alive, aborted fetuses. In the bed next to mine, I hallucinated dog-human hybrids, struggling to breathe. After quite a while of handling the fetuses, I switched beds. On the end of the bed, I thought I could see a joint. I tried to rip the joint out of the sheet, but it appeared to be attached. I also hallucinated a burrito in the blanket. On the ceiling, Ren and Stimpy and Star Trek were on. At another point, I was blind. One day at the hospital, I hallucinated a boat race on the wall, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was being assassinated. This was one of the most stupid things I've ever done. Please give this video a like if you're enjoying it so far, and subscribe if you're new or haven't already. Also comment down below if you have any Datura experiences. It's rare to see any of my viewers to actually have had an experience on it. Alright, let's go on to the next story. As anyone who knows of this drug, the realms this plant may show you are difficult to put into words, as though describing another sense. It was a July evening, calming nature surrounded me, and the glistening orange beam of sunlight fell into the green canopy, emitting a spiritual aura that was to commence me on my journey. For the last few weeks leading up to this, I had wanted to get my curious hands on Jimson seeds. I had been doing a year abroad in Berkeley, so psychonauts were common. After reading about this mysterious plant, I was more than just intrigued. Having previously had a passion for salvia and other natural deliriants, Datura seemed to be the missing link. I had never fully broken through, but psychedelics had become an almost cult-like obsession of mine. You see, I wasn't interested in the highs, the buzzes, or the euphoria of most substances. What got me was what they don't speak about, the spiritual groundbreaking reality some hidden plants could take you to. This made everything else irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. This Valhalla was one I could really see without having to imagine. So, after reading about this substance, my intrigue was too powerful. I felt as though I was chosen, as though this was now my turn to peek behind the curtain. Eventually, after countless dark web searches, my efforts came to no avail. In fact, this only made me more desperate to find it. Of all the psychonauts I knew, only one could help me in my search. This guy was called Jack. He was to become the one person I could take this with. After a few days of waiting, I was awoken from my sleep to see that I had managed to find some seeds. I froze. Reality hit me. This was real. My brain was anxious, but my desires prevailed. The mix of adrenaline and excitement led to loss of sleep that night. After having prepared the day for this trip, we drove to the forest in silence. We took the seeds. I felt belly-aching nausea for the first 5 minutes. Now we wait, I thought. Jack stood watching as a trip sitter, slowly roasting a joint as I prepared myself. All anxiety had gone. In fact, I felt completely sober, clear-headed, but physically slow. Suddenly, after a while, I saw my friend Jess. She'd come to see how I was doing. She'd been there before with me on shrooms, but I hadn't seen her in so long. "Are you feeling it yet?" "Not really. I just feel dehydrated. I think they might be low-dosed." However, I felt this negative feeling in my gut when I looked at her. I remembered the fakeness and wondered why she was even here. She cheated on me. She's not my friend. Jack called out, "What are you doing? Come back." Why is he trying to stop me from seeing Jess? I thought. For a brief second, reality struck me. What am I doing? I looked up to see nothing but the cool air. Night was commencing. Shivers went down my spine. My anxiety grew rapidly. I knew I was delirious. Then I was back to the strange realm. We decided we needed to get back. Things were becoming more and more weird. We somehow made it to my apartment. Jack insisted on staying to look after me. Whilst the PS4 was on, I thought I'd make a drink for my guest. I saw my dad there. His face seemed much younger, but anger could be seen in his face. "Don't invite people without telling me. This isn't your place." I sulked off like a child back to my room. I opened the window, pulled out a Lucky Strike and puffed it. It was euphoric, but just as I was beginning to have my first few inhales, I heard Jack run into my room. "Close the window right now." "Why?" He slammed it back and a look of terror was on his face. "You're not in a good way." "Shut up. I invited you to my dad's apartment for the night to chill. Don't be a pain." "You're fucked. This isn't your dad's place. Your dad has passed away. We need to sober you up. I'm worried." "I'm fine." I didn't take any real notice of what he was saying. In fact, I barely even recognized him. Why is he in my house? I knew I was supposed to be doing something today. I had forgotten I had taken Datura, forgotten who Jack was, and forgotten who I was. This terrified me. Paradox after paradox, I felt I was insane. I carried on smoking. My memory is still fuzzy at this part of the experience. According to Jack's recollection, I was angrily speaking gibberish. Not just a mix and match of words, but complete fluent gibberish, as if I was speaking another language. However, things got even more intense, and this is where my memory is really hazy. Jack told me that I was puffing away on an imaginary cigarette, talking to myself for an hour. Once he came into the room, however, he saw that I was in serious delirium. My arms were bleeding. I felt as though pain would take me away from this hellish reality. Pain would make me feel normal. Pain would zap me back into a microsecond of reality to have a glimpse back on normality. Just to be clear, I have never been into self-harming, and before this, had been free from any mental illnesses. This was the only antidote for me to escape this hell. Only a few minor cuts were in my arm before I dropped the pocket knife in a small puddle of blood. This was not the enlightening experience I thought I may have. After Jack moved me to bed, he said I lucidly told him I was sobering up and was fine. This couldn't be further from the truth, but this truth was found only too late. The whispers pounding my mind were unbearable. I'd lost my mind. After I crashed, I found myself on Jack's sofa. He found me lying unconscious on the floor of my kitchen, with butter spread all over the floor and cat food on top of the fridge. Eventually, after a few days, I was back into normal reality, yet the effects have never completely subdued. The existential dread of the trip was so real and so horrifying. I have been diagnosed with manic depression and general anxiety. Jack never really spoke to me in the same way, and I feel completely alone, knowing that just behind this very thin fabric of normality is hell just around the corner. Datura is the antithesis of enlightenment. It is the destroyer of hope. This trip was not a good one, as I might have caused myself some permanent damage to my body. Do not try this, as I was stupid enough to try. In terms of drug, it's like heroin compared to weed. It's deadly. I am only writing this experience not to encourage, but to hopefully stop someone from trying it. This is about 2% of my trip that I remember. 1:30 p.m. I was looking into drugs on Arrowhead and found Datura and immediately knew that I had one of those plants in my backyard. So I call my friend over who is 6 foot 3 inches and plays football, so he is super strong as I do not work out, so he could easily overpower me just in case shit got sketchy, which it did. I took 10 seeds from the plant and brewed it with 2 cups of water and drank it. 35 minutes in. I feel it coming up, like shrooms somewhat. After about 10 minutes, I stop feeling the high and just trip. I look around the room and I saw my friend using his cell phone. He drops it and I pick it up for him and hand it back. According to him, about every 10 minutes for the next 2 hours, I would be picking up his invisible phone and hand it to him. He just said thanks every time to avoid a bad trip. 1 hour in. I'm completely tripping. I hardly remember it, but I know I was in my hallway talking to my desk, thinking it was my ex-girlfriend. I started to cry and yell at the desk, and I punched the mirror from becoming so mad. I walked away from the desk after about 2 minutes, to me. My friend recorded the whole trip to show me today as I tripped less than 24 hours ago. He was telling me that I stood in the hallway laughing for a couple of hours, looking at the desk, having conversation in a form of zombie Latin, spoken Latin. He showed me a small part of the video. It was horrible. I was literally saying nonsense with a word in Latin I could understand, which was grandpa. Then I don't remember what happened after, but nothing bad I've been told. 4 hours in. I remember getting out of my house, and my friend immediately tries to put me back inside, or at least in the backyard. I panic and try to punch the devil in the face as I had actually hit my friend. I ran so fast into the street and barely missed a car. I remember feeling that was a spaceship, and I had missed my only ride out of this planet. Instantly, my friend detained me, and I thought I was in trouble, so my vision got red. The grass was even trying to help me by sticking the blades out to attempt to cut my friend's leg off and free me. We got inside, and I noticed the smell of something burning. I stumbled to the kitchen, and my friend said I went to my pantry and kept throwing food out. I don't remember after. 6 hours in. I was inside my room with my friend listening to Spangle, and in the video I stared at my hand endlessly, which my friend told me I did for about 2 hours. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw my Japanese fan. A little girl came in and walked out in front of it and walked away. This beautiful girl I hadn't recognized was a mystery, so I followed her to my brother's room. My friend said that I kept mumbling, "My girlfriend is here," which I assume is my ex because I'm currently not dating. I busted up into tears in my brother's room, asking myself why did my relationships burn? After all that, I remember my head was hitting something soft, and I woke up this morning with slight visuals. The after effects. When I got out of bed, I went downstairs to get some cereal, and I got the milk out and started to pour a little bit, and I saw a huge stream of milk, as if I had turned it completely upside down. Whoa, that's how I shall preface this. Just last week was the first time I had even heard of this stuff. The person who gave me the seeds told me the stories of the soldiers at Jamestown, and I thought, wow, I have to try this crap. Now, I am no novice drug user. I've pretty much tried everything, but I don't think I was prepared for the stinkweed trip. I had about 11 grams of Jimson weed seeds, so I ground them all up into a powder almost. Initially, I tried to smoke a pinch or two in my bowl. This didn't seem to have any effect, so I began to eat it in gram increments. I would wait about 20 minutes and then eat another gram. Nothing seemed to happen, although I did start to feel a bit floaty, and my peripheral vision was blurred and full of motion that didn't really exist. At this point, I was very disappointed, so I went to bed. Well, evidently it takes longer to kick in than I expected, because when I got up to go to the bathroom about 2 hours later, my motor functions did not exist at all. I fell at least 24 times and ran into every piece of furniture in existence in my apartment. I broke at least 1 toe, cracked 2 ribs, and bruised my tailbone, let alone the scrapes and bruises on my forearms, knees, and butt. I also was talking gibberish, according to my mother, with whom I live with, and whom I scared shitless during this event. I walked into her bedroom at 5:30 a.m. and began rummaging around. When she woke and asked what I was doing, I replied, "Relax," and then let loose a 10-minute stream of gibberish, which I felt made perfect sense. I also had in-depth conversations with myself, although I cannot remember what the hell about. I imagine I was still pretty fucked up for almost 2 days. I was unable to read small print as well until this afternoon, 2 days later, and I finally stopped seeing weird movement in my peripheral vision. Aside from the injuries I sustained, I think I would try it again, in a smaller dose, and preferably with someone else, and most likely outdoors, where there is no furniture or doorways to navigate. If you're considering trying this stuff, be wary and take small doses. My memories of this event are patchy at best, but through talking to the people involved, I put them together in a logical order. I came very close to death, and I do not recommend Datura as a recreational drug. Even though I have survived this experience, it was terrifying, but it was incredible and life-changing. I still have trouble dealing with the emotions I experience when I look back on it. This document is perhaps a therapeutic tool I am using to deal with it once and for all. Philadelphia, Thanksgiving break, junior year of high school. My best friend, and as of 2008, my wife, Amanda, slept over my house. We were big potheads at the time, but I've never experimented with anything else. We woke up early to go to our friend Jeremiah's house because he grew weed, and we wanted to celebrate the break by smoking all day. I drank a beer I stole from my dad on the way there. When we got there, a strange smell filled the house. His parents were away, and he had a pot of a strange amber liquid on the stove. Jeremiah was an interesting kid. He appeared to be a run-of-the-mill street thug, but he was very interested in botany. He would see plants in people's yards and he would know their Latin name and all these facts about them. When we got there, we asked him what the stuff was. He called it Datura Loco. I had never heard of it. He said he got the seeds on the internet and planted it and made a tea from it. He told me it had similar effects to weed, which was quite false. We smoked a blunt, but I was still intrigued. We hung out for a while and decided to go to Amanda's house and watch a movie. Before we left, I asked Jeremiah for some of the Datura tea. He put about 4 shot glasses worth in an empty bottle and we left. On the way to Amanda's house, I drank it all. The dose was for both of us, but Amanda didn't want any, so I drank it all. It was the worst tasting thing ever, but I forced myself to drink it. We arrived at her house and sat down to watch a movie. She put on Herbie Fully Loaded. Luckily, I don't remember any of it. Sometime throughout the movie, I felt extremely thirsty. Since it was autumn, I poured myself a glass of apple cider. It was difficult to drink. Every time I took a sip, I felt like my throat was closing up. I tried to drink it, but my thirst would not be quenched. We sat a little longer, then I began feeling very uncomfortable. I had to pee, so I got up and went to the bathroom, and nothing would come out. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, but could not pee. I decided to ignore it, and I went back to the couch. After the movie, our friend Samantha came to take us to our friend Rob's house to smoke more. By the time she arrived, I was speaking mostly nonsense. I felt like I was talking normally, but neither of them could understand, so it was kind of frustrating. We got into Sam's car. On the ride, I thought I was smoking a cigarette, but I kept dropping it, and then I wouldn't be able to find it. This would continue for the next 3 days. We got to Rob's house, and they all smoked another blunt. They didn't give me any, but I didn't notice. I was still smoking my imaginary cigarettes and speaking gibberish. I went into Rob's bathroom and tried to pee again. In my mind, I still couldn't pee, but from what I found out later, I actually peed all over the floor and the walls. I also took all of his family toothbrushes and put them in my pocket. I do not know why. They all went outside to smoke another blunt, and I did too. As they were smoking, I wandered away, and they found me about an hour later in a neighbor's yard talking to a pine tree. Again, I do not remember why. This is where my memory gets better. We left Rob's house and went to a party at my friend John's house. Again, I smoked imaginary cigarettes the whole way there. I had no idea who I was, where I was, or who I was with, and I'd given up communicating because no one could understand me. When we got there, a lot of my friends were there, and John's mom, who I'd known since kindergarten. It was his birthday, and there were balloons. The balloons moved around and seemed to follow me. Their shape shifted between squares, circles, and triangles. I continued to smoke imaginary cigarettes. At first, no one noticed my state because I was keeping quiet. I was standing in the corner because I was afraid of the balloons. John's mom saw me and came over to talk. She asked me about college, and I replied. I gave her a logical answer, but to her, I was still speaking gibberish. She knew I was on something and took me to my parents, who in turn took me to the hospital. This is where it gets messy. On the walk back to my parents' house, each piece of sidewalk I stepped on seemed to shatter away. I was terrified because I didn't want to fall through, but jolts of electricity ran through me when I tried to run. My parents were panicked and rushed me to the hospital because they didn't even know I smoked weed at the time. When I got to the hospital, they took me in right away. To me, the doctors and nurses looked like monsters, and I kept trying to get out of my chair and run. They had to physically restrain me. When they got a bed for me, they held me down and took my clothes off. I fought them as best as I could, but any fast movement would send a shock of electricity through my body. I punched and kicked the nurses a few times, but was unsuccessful in my attempt to escape. Eventually, they calmed me down. One of the doctors told me he was a wizard and had a magic potion to cure me. He handed me a cup of black liquid and told me to drink it. It was charcoal to pump my stomach, which was futile because it had been hours since I took it. I gulped the drink down and vomited everywhere. Fast forward a little, and still no memory. Apparently at this point, my kidneys were shutting down, so they had to put a tube in my penis so that I could pee. That was not fun at all. I remember screaming a lot and trying to fight, but I was tied down. Fast forward a little more. I was now in a different room. Chewbacca was next to my bed. I was tied to the bed still, and all sorts of IVs were in me. I kept trying to rip them out, so they had to put a lot of tape on them. Again, the imaginary cigarettes came back. I smoked it for a while, then dropped it in my sheets. I tried to look for it, but instead, I found the stick shift from my car. I looked up, and I was driving down the street all of a sudden. I drove for a while, and then went to hit the brakes, but they were gone. I kicked my feet, but the sheets were covering them. I then returned to the hospital room. I looked at the small fan in the room, and a strange miniature girl was crouched behind it, staring at me. I was scared of her and told Chewbacca to take them out, and he did. I found out later that Chewbacca was my dad. Next thing I knew, I was in Amanda's dorm room, smoking a bowl like I had been a few weeks ago. All of the same people were there, and that day replayed itself almost entirely. Then, I was back in the hospital bed. This vision of the dorm room and the vision of driving my car kept happening over and over, interspersed with being in the hospital bed next to Chewbacca. The whole time I kept dropping the imaginary cigarette I was smoking. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital bed feeling like I was hit by a train. I still had the P-tube inside me and was hooked up to IVs. I had only a few memories of the past 4 days, but they made no sense to me. As I write this, I realize again how patchy the memory is. My parents were there and explained to me what happened. They called Amanda to find out what I took. They told me my kidneys stopped working for almost 2 days and just now were working again, and my heart rate jumped from dangerously low to dangerously high over and over. The doctors gave me a 50% chance of survival. I spent the next day in ICU before they released me. I was extremely weak for the next 5 or 6 days, and they made me go to a drug counselor. Over the next 3 years, I did many drugs heavily and developed some serious problems. Anytime I did acid or shrooms, I would see that small girl behind the fan, and it creeped the hell out of me. 8 months ago, I went to jail and then to rehab, and I have not used drugs since then. Datura was the first step in a long road of drug abuse, and looking back, I wish it scared me straight. I still wish I remember more of what happened, but maybe it's best that I don't. March 17th, 2000. It was around 5 in the evening when I decided to collect a fresh specimen of plant material to begin with. I just went out of my house to the nearest playground, which is 3 minutes away, and just as I turned the corner, I saw 3 fine specimens of Datura anoxia. The plants were a deep green, growing to about 3 feet in height. There were numerous flowers and seed pods. Invoking a silent prayer, I cut off 2 leaves in what seemed to me to be a tender seed pod, not completely matured. I took these home. I skinned the seed pod using a peeler. I cut this peeled Datura pod in half. Half went into the compost pit, and the other half went into my stomach with the 2 leaves. Ingestion was a grueling process, and I almost threw up twice before I can get the plant material down my throat. I used some water to get it down. The taste was extremely bitter. I retired into my room and played some music. John McLaughlin with Shakti, I think. The first effects of the trip were obvious within approximately 20 minutes. I felt a dull, throbbing pain in my stomach. Not surprising considering that I had fasted for 12 hours prior to ingestion. It also felt like I had a rise in body temperature. The feeling rapidly changed into a flu-like feeling. This was getting me worried, and I was only an hour into the trip. I thought a change of scenery would be ideal, so a friend of mine, who was trip-sitting me, said we would go for a ride. I wasn't too sure of my physical coordination because I was feeling pretty nauseous, but my sitter assured me that there was no obvious physical response. He didn't seem to find me off balance at all. The elevator was really something, and I felt my stomach move into my throat. I would have thrown up had it not been that we reached the ground floor. As I sat on my bike, I noticed a distinct change in my mood, a change that I just cannot describe in words. It was like an upliftment of my physical body, a lightness. The entire environment was beginning to get a little dreamy edge to it. I said to the sitter, "Is this the beginning of the trip? It has to be." And he looked back at me and smiled. I felt compelled from deep inside to laugh, but my lips, they refused to move. For an instant wave of nausea racked my insides, and then it subsided again. It did not affect me during the next 3 days at all. Things were definitely starting to get weird now. There was a distinct change in my visual field, a blurring of things. It was like the whole environment around me was smeared as soon as I attempted to change my field of view. Gradually, all inputs from the peripheral vision area were gone. It was like looking at a painting. Move my head, smear, then painting again, and so on and so forth. This went on for quite a long period of time, during which my sitter also said that I was continuously talking to myself. The sitter mentions that I distinctly talked about time and that there was no such thing. It seemed I was way off from my usual rants. He said I was looking into space and blabbering about how time is always warped and that there is no such thing as time. This went on till almost 1 in the morning, when the sitter reports that I started to get agitated about something. The sitter thought it was a good idea for me to have a shower. I have no memory of it at all, though I have distinct memories of what followed. It almost felt like my body was coming back together. This was just as I was getting out of the bathroom. I felt cold and weary. My sitter reports that my pupils are completely dilated, and there is some amount of redness in the eyes. All lights around look really bright, so I put on a night lamp, lie down, and decide to read. The book makes absolutely no sense. The text looks like a barcode, or the UPC. When asked what book I am reading, I have no clue. I have absolutely no idea what book I am holding. I have no visual focus. At this point, I tell the sitter that I'm not feeling well and that I should see a doctor. My sitter reminds me that I have ingested some Datura. I don't seem to have a memory that I took any. I spent half an hour trying to convince my sitter that I didn't take any Datura and that he must be crazy, saying, "I would never do Datura, man. I think shrooms are the best." Writing this down, I can imagine what other people who have tripped on Datura go through. There doesn't seem to be a distinct difference in tripping and not tripping. You feel completely normal, yet you are in serious delirium and blabbering about all sorts of things. All of a sudden, I feel the need to lay down. The sitter turns off the light, and I begin to fly. I had this feeling of enormous speed, like when you are skydiving or bungee jumping. It felt like my heart was gonna thump out of my rib cage. My skin was crackling with electricity, and then I saw my mother. At that moment, the feeling stopped. I asked my mom what she was doing here. She should be teaching. The spring term is about to begin. She just laughed at me and asked what I wanted and why I had come. At that point, I got really confused. I told her she was the one who had to come to me. I thought she wanted to meet me. She said to me, "No, I don't want to meet you." And then I got the feeling again. I feel really sweaty and damp. It's like the air all around me has become really humid. I feel someone's hand on my shoulder. I look up, a blurry outline of my sitter. He said that for the past 3 hours I have been curled up in a fetal position on my bed, just shivering with cold. He felt a distinct rise in my body temperature and decided it was time for a shower. When on Datura, showers bring back a distinct back to normal feel, regardless of the fact that you are in extreme delirium. This can make you do really stupid things. March 18th, 2000. My sitter is prompting me to eat something. He said it's been almost 20 hours since I have been tripping. I tell him I'm not feeling hungry. I ask why is the light so bright, and he says it's daytime, the sun is out. I asked him when will I rise and when will I set, the light hurts my eyes. I am complaining continuously, almost whining. He gets me some bread and some milk. Suddenly I say I am hungry and wolf down 4 slices of bread and swallow the milk. It's strange because normally I hate milk. I have puked all over the table and have shit in my pants. My sitter has changed and I have no clue who or where I am. There is darkness everywhere I look. I felt no nausea, but I still puked, almost like a purge. At this point, I say out loud, "R, you think I'm dead? 'Cause I think so. And I'm not feeling so great. Can we call a doctor?" Again, my sitter from now on, R, reminds me that I'm tripping on Datura. I say, "So what if I'm tripping on it? I think I'm dead anyway." R laughs a bit and says, "It's been 34 hours since you ate it, and you are still very delirious." I seem to find it funny and laugh too. When he gives me a hand mirror, I can't see a thing, and say it isn't a mirror, just a dumb piece of plastic. He says it's my girlfriend's compact she had left behind, but I say I don't have a girlfriend. I don't remember any of what follows, so it's a rough reconstruction. March 19th, 2000. I curled up in my bed and was talking to myself for hours. I urinated in my bed 2 times, and I lacked any sense of place and time. R reports that my body became flushed, where the skin gets all red like when you blush. Seems towards the end of day 2, I was no longer agitated. I wanted to read a book, but I still couldn't. I keep complaining about my inability to read. R says he'll put on some music. He plays something on the CD player, and I can't hear a thing. He says it's the Doors, and I say it sounds like he is playing some kind of sound frequency. I talk animatedly about how I can fly when I close my eyes. R tells me, "Why don't you relax and try to fly?" It seems after this that I went to lay down on my bed for almost 10 hours. It seems I was blabbering in the beginning, but gradually I stopped, and then at some point during the day I fell asleep. March 20th, 2000. I wake up at around 6 a.m. I feel cleansed. I can read and write and listen to music. I feel like I have that heavy-headedness you get when you smoke through the night and sleep very little. R says he has never seen someone trip on Datura like that and that he would never like to try it. He says I have been completely mad for the past 2.5 days. I don't agree with him, but I keep my mouth shut. March 21st, 2000. I have slept for almost 20 hours, had very vivid dreams, woke up thrice to drink water. I feel like I have been reborn. I feel perfectly normal. Datura has to be without doubt the weirdest deliriant there is. It had me completely deluded about what I saw, what I heard, what I ate, and what I felt. It is a complete acting drug, one that should be used only if you are ready to walk the fine line. Datura is really taking it close to the edge. Never have I felt elation, depression, anger, hate, love, and insanity all in one trip. Never have I felt such a motive physical fear and sadness, and I didn't know I could fly. I do not recommend Datura for anyone who is not ready. Just open your mind. At around midnight, I took 20 Dramamine tabs and 2.5 grams of Datura. Big mistake with the Datura. After only about 30 minutes, I started to feel like how I do when the flu starts out, not like a trip at all. Eventually, how long this went on, I cannot remember. I lost all contact with reality and thought more or less that I had died. In all reality, from what my mother has told me, I removed all of my clothing, ran through the house naked, and screamed about the leaves and the tree branches growing out of my grandmother's head. Then I went into the bathroom and took everything out of the cabinet and arranged it on the floor. After that, my mom said she didn't know where I ran off to. Well, I'm guessing I blacked out, because all I remembered now, and could remember then, was that I thought I died and somehow managed to wake up in my bed. When I woke up, I felt very heavy and tired still, and my chest hurt. I realized I had been sweating badly because everything was soaked with sweat. I got up to go to the bathroom and immediately fell down with extreme chest pains. After about 5 minutes of this, I started to black out again. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the intensive care unit of the hospital here. They told me I had suffered a massive heart attack from atropine-like poisoning, and that I was extremely lucky to even be alive at all. After a few days and many, many tests, it came to be known that I'd suffered a mild heart attack while on the chemicals. Then the next morning, from all the stress and residual effects from the drugs, I suffered the major one. I'm only 24 years old and have to take medication the rest of my life to keep my heart beating normal and to keep it from not racing out of control. The Dramamine and Datura combo caused damage to the AV nodes and the natural pacemaker in my heart by causing far too much stimulation, which in turn caused me to have a heart attack, damaging my heart completely. The doctors tell me as long as I take the medications and don't do this ever again, I should live a normal, healthy life. But I still suffer chest pains and high blood pressure now, which I truly believe to be caused from that experience. I have done both chemicals separate and had some wild and fully whacked out experiences from it, to which I hope I never experience again. What I did in the winter of 2005 in a small town is something I will never do again. I regret ever having done it, and yet, it was perhaps the most interesting time of my life. For a time, I was the essence of delirium. For about a year, I had been smoking pot on a daily basis, and in that time had tried the usual psychoactives, shrooms, acid, salvia, Hawaiian baby wood roast, and my favorite, ecstasy. So one night, my friend, let's call him Ryan, and I had been planning to get some rolls for about a month now, and had found someone to hook us up. But the day before I got the phone call, no parent, or in this case, stoner, ever wants to get, my dealer got tickets to a concert at the last minute and was out of state. We tried to call everyone we had ever met to find a hookup, but to no avail. So we started walking down the street to our local restaurant, and along the way, I noticed a white trumpet-shaped flower growing in some bushes on the side of the road. Ryan and I both identified it as Datura, and decided to snap a pod off of one. We went to the restaurant, and I decided to eat 10 seeds. Since we didn't know what it would do to us, I decided to take them, and Ryan would be my sitter. We finished our food and walked home. As soon as we got back to my house, I started feeling very paranoid. We went into the living room and started watching the movie Groundhog Day, and as we watched, I kept forgetting that Ryan was there and would become scared and leave the room every time I looked at him. I went into the kitchen and started pouring water into a glass, but started to notice things about my kitchen that I hadn't noticed before. There were spider webs in the corner of the ceiling, and the floor was split in the center. I screamed and ran into the living room where Ryan had finished watching the movie and asked if he could smoke in here. I said he could and curled up under some covers on my couch. About 3 minutes later, I took the covers off of my face and noticed Ryan pulling a cigarette out of his pocket and asking if I had a lighter. I picked one off of the floor sitting next to me and handed it to him. However, when I asked for it back, he said he had thrown it at me. I didn't think anything of it, knowing that I could find it later, but soon, Ryan's cigarette fell out of his hand. I told Ryan that he dropped it on his lap and he freaked out. He began rolling on the ground, and before he could roll over the cigarette, it disappeared. I suddenly remembered I had taken Datura and asked Ryan if he had. He said he had eaten 12 seeds without telling me. I realized we had shared an illusion and got extremely frightened. I ran up my stairs, which seemed to go on forever, and every time I tried to get to the top step, it would slide out from under me. I finally gave up, but managed to somehow slide to the top of the stairs. I got up and ran into my bedroom and fell down on the floor. I slowly got up, and then suddenly I realized that I was in my room with my old friend from high school. Let's call him Bobby. I started reminiscing with him about the crazy times we had, and I started to roll a joint. I started to light it up, and Bobby said we should go out onto the roof to smoke it. We went out my window and sat on the roof and started hitting what had now become a bong. Then, as he passed it to me, it suddenly dropped off the roof, and I leaned into the gutter to try to catch it before I managed to completely fall off. Luckily, I blacked out. I was woken up 3 hours later by police sirens as the police pulled into the front of my yard. I stumbled into the window and ran out of my room to find Ryan. I ran down the stairs and saw him passed out in the bathroom, in the bathtub, with his wrists bleeding. I smashed the mirror in the bathroom with my fist for some reason and ran out the back door and into the cornfield in the back of my yard. I kept running through the stalks until I got to the deepest, darkest spot in the forest of corn. I knelt down to hide from the police, but I kept hearing dogs barking and could see distant stalks moving. I started crying into my hands, and when I removed them, Ryan was there with me. He told me to run with him to the distant caves, and I ran with him. But we were in a jungle now. This shit was weird. I woke up in my backyard about 2 hours later, underneath a wheelbarrow. I went inside and found Ryan not to be there, and I was still tripping. I realized that my life was like Groundhog Day, and that I could kill myself and come back the next day. So I ran my head into the wall 3 times and lost consciousness. I awoke again in an alley outside of the restaurant. How did I get here? The next thing I remember is walking home and seeing some very frightening faces along the sides of the road. I walked into a parking lot next to my house and leaned up against an SUV and passed out. The next thing I remember, I was in the SUV flying down the highway. I had gotten into the car somehow and started it and began seeing vampires flying around the car. I slammed on the brakes and ran into the woods nearby, pursued by the same vampires, and clawed at a tree until my fingers bled, and sat there shivering, hallucinating, until sleep reclaimed me. I woke up and began walking back to the highway. It took about 15 minutes to get there, but it didn't seem like I had run that far into it. I got into the SUV and drove around the highways for an hour and a half before finding my way back home. When I got home, Ryan was not there. I was far too worried to search for him, so I slept for 10 hours to escape the terrible feeling Datura was giving me. The next day I felt like shit and called around to find out if anyone knew where Ryan was. It turns out that Ryan was in the hospital with his spine cracked after having been found by my neighbor. Apparently, the cops had never showed up. Indecently, there was no cornfield in my backyard. My gutter was hanging off of my roof, and my house was a mess. The owners of the SUV reported the car stolen, and even though I returned it and explained, they still insisted on pressing charges, and now I am going on trial for car theft. So basically, Datura kind of fucked my life up, and I never plan on doing it again. Okay, so I think I almost fucking died from using Datura. Here where I live, there's an abundance of it. I took about 4 moonflowers and made a brew. It was about 6 p.m., so by the time I started tripping, my parents would be asleep. But anyway, after about an hour and a half, I started to feel it. I started off by feeling very heavy. Small text was too blurry to read, and I cannot justify the state of my mouth. My mouth and throat were so dry, I could barely talk. It felt similar to a DPH trip, except for the blurred vision. I didn't have any closed-eye visuals, yet I had full-blown delusional hallucinations with my eyes open. When I really started to trip, I gathered every ounce of strength I had and stood up to go get some water. But there was a man standing in front of my door, blocking my exit. I started talking to him about something, then snapped back to reality and closed my eyes and said you're not there, and continued on my mile-long journey for water. I kept talking to people who I know, but they weren't there. At one point, my ceiling started to stretch up into the sky to the point of infinity. My arms and legs were now so heavy, I could barely even move a finger. And even when I tried to, I felt drunker than I had ever been in my life. I kept getting cold flashes and passed out. I woke up in the ER with a pretty hefty bill, and it said something about a drug-induced seizure. You know what to do. Go like that video and comment down below. Subscribe too if you haven't already. I have so many other Datura videos on my channel that you'll be set for hours, maybe even days. Let's move on to the next story. This occurred 2 weeks ago, and I still feel some of the effects. It was a Saturday afternoon when my friend came to visit, carrying a bag of Datura seeds. At the time, I wasn't very informed on the effects of the drug, other than this will make you trip. So being stupid, I decided to take it with him, something I would soon regret. He opened the bag of seeds and said we'll do half each. Couldn't really tell you how many seeds there were or what type of Datura we took, but it definitely was more than enough. I'd estimate around 30 to 50 seeds each. Once we consumed the Datura, we sat down and watched a movie. I'd say around 1.5 hours in, I started to feel extreme cotton mouth. It felt as if my tongue had no coating, and no matter how much water I drank, it felt like my tongue was bleeding when it hit the roof of my mouth. Not a pleasant feeling at all. Still, I felt no effects similar to LSD or mushrooms, which I have experimented in the past with. I fell asleep soon after the movie finished, thinking nothing of it, and that we must have took too little. I woke up not soon after, and was extremely disoriented. I tried to wake my friend, but he was no longer next to me. I had the sudden urge to urinate and stood at the toilet for about 20 minutes, incapable of the luxury of relieving myself, so I gave up. Knowing I was tripping, I decided to look in the mirror, as I enjoyed doing so on LSD and mushrooms. However, what I saw was nothing. I had no reflection, which scared me quite a lot. I started going into a panic in which I saw the floorboards quite literally open up, like some sort of gateway to the underworld. I saw hands and feet through the floorboards, and it looked like my friend. So I tried to jump into the hole I saw in order to reach him, but the harder I tried, the more weak I got, and eventually, I passed out. Waking up not soon after yet again, I was in a different room that I could not recognize. I am not a smoker, but for some reason, I had the sudden urge to smoke a cigarette. Although my friend was a smoker, and it could have possibly been his cig that I was smoking, I believe that I didn't smoke it at all. This is when the trip hit a new level of terrifying. I saw an old man who seemed lost and alone. I hugged the man for whatever reason and attempted to comfort him. He looked like a lost soul. Looking back on this moment of the trip, I believe I was really just trying to comfort myself. The old man I saw was really just a mirror of my frightened ego and mind. I don't know, just something to think about. Still inside the house, I believe I started feeling spiders crawling on my skin, so I stripped all my clothes off and remained the rest of the trip naked. Blood was pouring out of my pores, and I could see the darkness of my eyes through a third-person view. Unfortunately, this is all I remember and can recall from the experience. According to my mate, he never felt the Datura and actually completely lost me, so I'm not quite sure where I was when I experienced this. Thank you for listening, and if you can take anything from my experience, I'd highly regard Datura as one of the most powerful compounds in the universe, and should not be taken lightly. I've never been a strong responder to anticholinergic deliriants for whatever reason. I've tried DPH and various other antihistamines before brugmansia. I've even tried Datura stramonium seeds. None of them ever did much for me beyond a horrid body load and dysphoria, hardly ever any hallucinations. Then there's brugmansia. There's a brugmansia tree a couple of blocks away from me, and one day I decided fuck it, maybe this one will work. I harvested 2 leaves and a flower. I cut them up and made a tea out of them at around 7 p.m. Sunday night. Lady Datura clearly was trying to spare me the previous times I tried it out of pity, but this time, she must have gotten tired of my shit. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Within 15 minutes, the signature cottonmouth and body load began to manifest. I struggled to my bed and sat down. Within 30 minutes, dysphoria began. At this point, I stopped keeping track of time so the details get murky. The dysphoria just got worse and worse, and coupled with the body load made me scared shitless. After a while, it was so unbearable that I decided to just go to bed to end the experience. This is where I think I insulted Lady Datura, because the moment my head hit the pillow, everything went to shit. Part 1. Rating consumers under Datura's watchful eye. A voice started yelling at me, "Coward," and "Get up, stupid, I'm coming for you." After this, I blacked out, thinking I had managed to sleep. The next thing I remember is sitting in my consumer studies class taking a test. I am writing in an almost trance-like stream of consciousness way, not once looking up from the paper. Then I heard a banging sound and a voice. "Are you okay in there?" This caused me to look up from my paper. I wasn't in the consumer's class anymore. I was in my bathroom. I heard another knock on the door and the same voice saying, "What's going on? Do you need help?" As that happened, the walls started closing in on me, and I knew I had to get the hell out of there. When I opened the door, I saw my mother, but her flesh was rotting and melting, and I screamed for help. According to my mom, I had been in the locked bathroom for hours, muttering gibberish and the occasional fragment of my consumer set work. I black out again. Part 2. A trip to the lab. The next thing I remember is being dragged out of a white van into a windowless concrete building. This was actually my mom's car in the hospital. Upon arrival, I was sat down in the lobby. I don't remember when they started trying to administer a nasal COVID test, but I just remember a really primal fear and the activation of my flight reflex when I saw it. They tried to shove it up my nose, but I was just not having it. It took 5 people to restrain me when they finally managed. After this, I was out on a cocktail of sedatives administered through a drip. Apparently, I managed to stay awake for hours despite that, and the doctors telling me to sleep. I did nod off eventually at around 4 p.m., I was told. Part 3. Waking up in purgatory. After waking up, my mind was in a complete sedative-induced haze. I couldn't focus on anything, and my vision was very blurry. What I remember most vividly were all the flies in the room with me, on the walls and floors. I convinced myself that I had died and I was in purgatory. My reasoning was that hospitals are hygienic and there were flies in this one, so it had to be a fake hospital. I snapped out of it when the doctor came in to explain the dangers of anticholinergic delirium. 6 out of 10 drug, kinda anxiety inducing, may try again. Just kidding. I want to emphasize right from the start that my one-time experience with Datura was by no means pleasant. I'd heard that hallucinations and such could be achieved by eating some of the seeds. A friend of mine who knew where some could be picked got a baggie full of seeds and gave it to me. 3 other people that I worked with also wanted to try it. We all ate about a tablespoon of seeds and went home. Nothing about this experience was pleasant. Physically, the severe dehydration was without a doubt the worst I've ever experienced. I could pretty much stand in front of the toilet with a quart of water and begin drinking it with it going straight through me. This would last the entire duration of my trip. Trip is not exactly the word I'm looking for, but it's the best I can do. I tried to go to sleep, but everything was kind of blurry and surreal. After a while, into the bedroom walks a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a while. We chat a bit. I'm trying to be quiet so as to not wake my girlfriend. Into thin air, he disappears, although this doesn't seem too strange to me. A short while later, in comes another friend who soon disappears in the same fashion. The only thing that struck me odd about this entire parade of people marching into my bedroom was that my girlfriend hadn't gotten mad and kicked all of us out. A couple of times she did poke me and tell me to shut up, but that was only because I was doing all the talking. I had several visits that night. Another thing that I kept doing, as did a friend on his experience, was to try and light a cigarette, but start thinking about something and never get it lit. Then a bit later, try to smoke it. I'd realize it wasn't lit and start to light it without getting the job done, over and over and over. On one of my many excursions to the kitchen for more water, then straight to the bathroom, I passed by a friend standing in the corner with a paper bag over his head, just standing there. I said hello on my way, but this didn't seem unordinary at all to me. Everything was as it is in a dream, kind of vague and unreal. A couple of times I started to get ready for work, even though I didn't have to be in for several more hours. Luckily, there was a voice of reason somewhere in my head that explained that I wasn't needed at work, not for quite some time yet, and I went back to bed. I'm sure that would have made quite a spectacle, showing up for work in that state I was in. The entire experience lasted for about 15 hours, except for my eyes being so dilated that I couldn't even read a newspaper. This lasted about 3 days. I wasn't sure if my vision would ever return. I will never try this again, and urge anyone considering trying it to not do it. I can tell you firsthand of the toxicity involved, and that I consider myself lucky to have gotten off so easy.
I was 18 years old and living in Senegal, Africa. Some native friends, knowing of my occasional marijuana and LSD use at the time, urged me to try an amazing plant that grew in the cemetery. However, some people warned me that the plant, which they called kubajara, was extremely dangerous. I pretty much dismissed these warnings, figuring that they had never done acid. This was a mistake. One night, an acquaintance dropped by my apartment, my parents' apartment, which was on the 18th floor. He had a pod and leaves from the plant. I figured we should just make a tea out of both, so we did. I drank about a cup mixed with instant coffee. This was probably about 8 p.m. He left, not having drunk any. I can't remember the period of time after I ingested the drug, but the next thing I remember is answering the door and seeing two very grotesque monsters come into the apartment. In reality, it was my sister and her boyfriend. I had no idea I was hallucinating, unlike acid, where I'm aware of reality. I was completely unaware of reality for the next 24 hours. I was awake all night, seeing armies of insects on the kitchen floor, playing poker with people who were not there, and having long conversations with dwarves under my bedclothes. This was not in the least funny. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I only recall bits and pieces of the night, but the parts that I do recall are very terrifying. I remember looking in the bathroom mirror and seeing that my pupils filled my entire iris with no color left over at all. I had a conversation with the person in the mirror, not realizing it was me. I could not urinate even though I desperately had to. My mouth was drier than Death Valley. I remember awaking my mother at dawn by standing at her bedside and asking if we were going to the Montreal Olympics that year. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was continually drawn to the balcony, and when I looked over at the streets, I kept seeing horrible car crashes. I could clearly see the cars crashing and hear the noise they made, plus the screams of the injured. Then planes started to crash. I saw people flying outside the balcony. Friends came and went during the day, and they were all extremely alarmed at my behavior. Someone had to watch me carefully. It was only towards the next evening that I began to realize that I had done a drug and that nothing I had seen had been real. I believe I was a hair's breadth away from seizures and possibly death. I do not recommend any experience with this drug whatsoever. I remember before I moved away last summer, there was talk of a plant called Datura. People were saying I could trip on it, so me already having done shrooms and acid thought, okay, let's give it a try. Datura is a plant that grew in my neighborhood with trumpet-shaped flowers on it, but before these trumpet-shaped flowers grow, there are seed pods, big, round, and spiky, extended from vines in front of an old lady's house. My friend Brian and I were total stoners looking to get fucked up, but we had no idea what we were in for. Word on the streets was that if I broke open these pods and consumed the seeds, I would hallucinate. So we, being the stupid stoners we are, ate one full pod, sat for about 15 minutes, and were not feeling anything. After consuming about 350 of these seeds, we thought we were Superman, neither of us tripping yet. We made our way to the park, and I started to feel strange. I had the worst cotton mouth. It felt like I had smoked a pound of weed. Then I looked down at my legs as I trotted down the pathway to the park. They looked and felt as if they were pendulums swinging back and forth. I finally got to the park, and my friend Steve was there. He had some weed, and I tried to smoke, but I couldn't. It tasted vile and disgusting. My face began to feel as if it was melting off my skull, and I started to trip. Bad. As I lay in dismay, my friends asked me if I was alright. I replied saying, "I don't know. Tell that man with the sword to stay away." I thought I was in the Revolutionary War in a trench. All of my friends were dressed in full combat gear. I decided to go home because the shit was starting to freak me out, but as soon as I started walking home, my legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, and soon enough, my arms felt this way also. I realized I was fucked up and would probably die if I didn't get to a hospital, so I continued to try and walk home until I finally got there. My parents weren't home, thank God, so I went right to bed and fell asleep for about 4 to 5 hours. When I awoke, I walked down the stairs and fell right off the staircase. Then I went to the bathroom and tried to piss, but couldn't. Then I felt something wet in my pants and thought it was just water, but I had pissed myself in reality. After I pissed my pants, I heard my parents pull up, and the entire bathroom went white. I couldn't see a thing. I was banging around so much. After my parents opened the door, they found me on the floor passed out, completely red as my father described, red as a lobster. When I awoke, I was in a state of delirium. I didn't even recognize my own parents. I kept asking, "Who are you?" to my mother and calling my father a fat fuck. Then they tried to ask me what I was on. I tried to lie and say I was just smoking weed. They knew for goddamn sure I wasn't high on weed. I don't remember anything after that, but my dad told me what I did. He was hesitant at first because it had scared the living shit out of him. He had never seen anything like that in his life. He told me that when I got to the hospital, I tried to bite the doctors and beat them up. It required 4 doctors to strap me down. Still, my skin was a very red tone, and when I was strapped down, I tried so hard to get out, my neck muscles bulged at least 4 inches from my body, and then I passed out. I awoke the next morning to recognizing people again. At close range, my vision was so blurry, I couldn't even read. Datura is the worst drug in the world. Young and adventurous, willing to go the whole 9 yards at the drop of a pin, I caught a glimpse of something I wish I never saw. Standing proud in the garden of a complete stranger, a plant that was to change my mental state forever, the worst thing I've ever done. I waited until night to make my move, raping the beast of the flowers that made it so recognizable. Boiling them up in a little water, I made a potion that would make me anything but the person that was born from my mother's womb. Drinking the muddy-looking water was far from pleasant, and so were the effects. About 15 minutes rolled by, and I was sitting, scratching my head waiting, and bang! All of a sudden, I was locked in an extremely uncomfortable rushing sort of feeling. This lasted for roughly 5 minutes and was followed by blurred vision. I could not read anything small. I was looking at my watch trying to read the time, but no matter how close or how far I held it from my face, it was all a blur. It wasn't long before I was totally removed from the real world and placed into a world of pleasure, fear, and discomfort. If there is a hell, I was on a day trip. Walking around the house in an attempt to find myself, I was switching between fun times and bad times. I walked into my bedroom, and as I passed my wall mirror, I saw a stranger in my room. Standing to the side of the mirror, I was thinking, who the fuck is that? It was about 5 minutes before I realized that it was my own reflection, and stood there laughing at my own stupidity. Time seemed to just slip by, and before I knew it, the next day had arrived. Smoking imaginary cigarettes, walking outside completely naked, and talking to people who would disappear into thin air, I started wondering if this was going to end at all. It did end after time, but it was not nice. I was out of it for 2 days, and coming down from it was very scary. It was a very evil feeling. I felt like I had sold my soul to the devil. I can't really explain it, but it is not something that I can ever forget. If I could find a time machine, I would go back and undo the terrible mistake that I made when I collected evil from someone's garden. Just recently have I discovered that the hundreds of plants growing uncontrollably on my family's farm are Datura. For years, I've been overlooking the plant as if it were any other, until a horse of ours got sick from ingesting quite a few leaves. The vet came out to check on him and informed me that the plant, aka Jimsonweed, was poisonous if ingested by animals, but had a quite pleasant high if ingested or smoked by people. For a little over a year, I ignored this information, along with the plant, until riding home from school with a friend. Somehow, we began talking about the shortage of marijuana we've been having, and the Jimsonweed growing around my house was brought up. Really enthusiastic, she told me a friend of hers ate a few of the same seeds and tripped over 12 hours. I almost laughed, but told her I would check it out, and sure enough, the seeds were identical to Datura stramonium. For nearly a week, I researched Datura and learned more than I thought possible about it. I thought it was a little much for what I am used to because I've never gotten stronger than marijuana or ecstasy, but decided it was an experience that I was ready for. Unfortunately, I was very wrong. At around 9:30 on a Thursday night, I chewed and swallowed a teaspoon of the very bitter, black mature seeds and washed them down with Gatorade. I chose Gatorade because of the intense dehydration I had read about. I had a sitter, we can call her Tori, which is needed while on this stuff. Around 10:45, my mouth became so dry it was sickening and impossible to talk. I began to talk what sounded perfectly normal in my head, but gibberish to my ears and to Tori. It would have been very frustrating if I needed to say something important, but since I didn't, Tori and I found it entertaining. I got the dilated pupils and the constant using the bathroom, but besides that, nothing too intense. About an hour later, Tori and I decided to crash, which was fine with me because my throat was so dry it was no fun talking. I'm not sure what time I woke up, but it must have been around 10 a.m. because Tori had to be at work by 12. I was tripping hard, but nothing seemed too unnormal to me. Random people watching me go to the bathroom, Tori disappearing in the middle of our conversations, and spending hours in front of the mirror talking to my new friend, my reflection, all seemed very normal. Every once in a while, I would snap back to myself and realize I was tripping and kind of laugh or shake my head, only to find me doing it all over again a few minutes later. At one point, me and my sister, who knew nothing about me taking the seeds, were making my bed, and I kept telling Tori to get up so we could finish, but she'd just stare at me, even though I asked her more than once. My sister kept asking, "Who are you talking to?" And I would answer, "Tori," and point to the corner of my bed where she was lying down. A little shocked and kind of scared, my sister said, "Tori left 20 minutes ago." And not believing her, I frantically began throwing back my bed covers, expecting to find her and prove she was in my bed. I kept putting things down that disappeared constantly and walked around the house talking to every inanimate object that would talk back. None of this was too strange until I looked in my closet. Me and a couple people I'd never met before, obviously hallucinations, were going through my closet to pick out an outfit to wear to school, even though I wasn't going to school for a few more days. I got kind of lonely after they disappeared, but kept looking for an outfit anyways. Suddenly, I spotted a shirt of mine with a few little white bugs on it. I panicked and my mind raced. What if these bugs are on me? I mean, I wear these shirts. I instantly became paranoid. I looked on my arm and saw bugs digging underneath and crawling under my skin. I ran out of my room and found my mom, screaming to her about the bugs on my body. She said she saw nothing, but I figured she was just trying to comfort me. I clawed at the bugs, but they were too fast and strong. My mom's first reaction was that I was having a bad acid trip, but from the seriousness and paranoia in my voice, she started taking me seriously. She immediately called every doctor to see if any of them could take an emergency visit and drove me over to the first one available. FYI, because of this, I now have lost a great deal of respect for doctors. The doctor immediately looked at me and decided I was having an unexplained allergic reaction to who knows what. By now, I am red all over and bleeding in areas where I try to get these bugs. She figures the redness is my skin breaking out and not inflicted by my own self. I now have to apply this cream over my entire body and continue to take a million antibiotics for something I don't even have, and only I know I never really had. So whoever decides they want an unforgettable experience, please be careful. Being scared beyond belief is no fun, and let me add that nothing about the entire trip was the least bit fun or pleasant. It was weird and confusing, and 100% out of control. The pupil dilation left me totally letterblind for a week. The dry mouth left my throat hurting for an entire week, and not to mention a mild depression about myself. If you are looking for a good high for the night, skip Datura. The first encounter with the all-too-evil substance known as Jimson weed was in March of 2005. My brother and a neighbor were running around the soybean field eating various seeds and the like, so I followed them and took part in this childish act of eating anything that they came across because I was very intoxicated. While in the midst of this game, I came across an evil-looking plant. This plant had an amazing aura about it. It gave me the chills looking into this four-paned orb from hell. It can only be described as Satan's rattle, a large brown orb covered in wicked spikes and open with small round black seeds with a curious dimple in the middle. I stood in awe at my new discovery. It made me feel so awkward just to be standing in front of such a demonic-looking plant. It made me want to turn and run from it, yet I was strangely being pulled into it. The next thing I know, I am gobbling down these seeds and going from pod to pod and devouring all that plant had to offer me. I thought nothing of it and moved on with the game. I went back to the house and smoked a joint and drank a can of Budweiser and then laid down to go to sleep. I awoke in a cold sweat at 4:15 a.m. and my body was on fire. I looked at the foot of my bed and my two best friends were standing there. I started laughing hysterically at the fact that they would stop by and wake me up at such a late time. I proceeded to have a little party in my room with them. They came up and sat on either side of me, and we had a great time passing joints and smoking cigarettes. I went to the bathroom and washed my hands. I looked in the mirror, and my face contorted to an impossible shape, and I shook myself off and splashed some water on my face, still none the wiser to what was happening. I walked back to my room where at my door my mother was standing. I greeted her and informed her that my friends had stopped by for a late night visit. She gave me the weirdest look I think she has ever given me. I re-entered my room, and my friends were nowhere to be found. Suddenly, I went into a panic and started to tear my room apart. I searched high and low expecting them to be hiding, but of course, they were not. Then out of nowhere, I just blacked out. I awoke the next morning and I was naked on the living room floor with a blanket over me, and the house had been destroyed. My parents were sitting on the couch together, looking at me and talking. I looked up and I couldn't understand a word that they said though. Every word that they said sounded like they were speaking in reverse. Suddenly, I sat up thinking that my parents had gone insane. I tried to stand up but failed horribly and just flopped back onto my back. In my mind, horrible thoughts began to swirl around. Thoughts that my parents had slipped me some drug while I was asleep and were speaking in a secret language so that I wouldn't be able to know what else they had planned for me. I don't believe that I have ever felt that scared in my entire life. I felt so alone and empty, like I was deserted on some horrible little island and that it was slowly sinking. I lay there for some time just thinking and soaking everything in. For some odd reason, I always had a cigarette in my hand that would never go out or need to be ashed. After a while, I drifted back to sleep. When I awoke, I was in my father's car and we were driving down this dark road that seemed to be covered in oil. It felt like we were floating above the road and sliding from side to side. I looked at him and tried to say something, but it came out as an inaudible squeak of intelligence. He looked at me and his beard seemed to grow longer as he looked into my eyes for eternity. It seemed as if time had stopped dead in its tracks, and for a minute, everything seemed fine. Then all of a sudden, I hit reality again, and hard too. It was like time had been still, but then had to fast forward to catch up with itself. I turned and looked into the mirror, and my reflection looked at me and started laughing at me. My reflection had this maniacal grin as it laughed in my face, seemingly mocking me and my tortured reality. This sent me into a rage that I could not hold back. I lashed out at the mirror trying to tear it off the side of the car. My father just hit the automatic window and up it went, and I couldn't see my reflection anymore. It was like staring into a mirror and no one is there to stare back. So my attention went from the mirror to my hand, where a freshly lit cigarette sat waiting to be smoked. This made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I smoked and smoked and smoked, and again, the cigarette never burned down any. Eventually, we arrived at our destination, the asylum. We got out, and I looked up in awe at this towering structure. It seemed to go forever up into the heavens above. I felt a strange sense of omnipotence, like I was capable of doing anything, walking through walls, flying, etc. I walked tall into the hospital, babbling about the higher power and how I was returning home where I belonged. We walked in and sat in the waiting room for what seemed like days. Finally, this nice angel lady came out and whisked me away to what I believed to be my rightful place on the throne of the heavens. Well, I was wrong, because before I knew it, I was being sedated with Haldol. When I awoke again, I had some of my senses back and I realized where I was.
Everything just felt like a dream. It seemed like none of the events of the last 2 days had even happened. I guess I was in shock at the fact of being in a hospital and why I would even be in such a place. Well, I ended up spending the next 2 weeks in the inpatient psychiatric program being evaluated and medicated. Eventually, I completely came back down and seemingly stabilized. Since my insurance wouldn't cover any additional time for diagnosis, I was released with an incomplete diagnosis. I eventually put 2 and 2 together and realized that the evil demonic plant that I had ravished had been the culprit in this horrible turn of events. Since then, I have experimented with Datura several more times. Once more, I ended up in the hospital off a much larger dose, and after that, I learned a more correct dosage of Datura and how to deal with the alarmingly realistic hallucinations and delirium. I am 15 years old. If you were to ask anyone to describe my relationship with drugs, they would tell you I am one who is down for anything. Any drug you place in front of me, I will take it with no regards for what could happen to me, which isn't something to be proud of at all. It was a typical Saturday afternoon with my friends. Me and my friend had some coruscantins. We all drove down to the park where everyone goes to smoke, drink, do pills, or whatever. It's just the hangout spot for kids trying to get messed up. That day, we saw some kids that were friends with my friends, and they told us about this plant. They called it Hell's Bells. I have heard of it before, but I wasn't too sure on what it was or the effects of it. They told us they had taken it earlier that day, and the one kid was still very out of it. He was running around the field chasing a dog who obviously wasn't even really there. They told us at first you feel doped out on pills, then you feel drunk and are unable to walk, then you start hallucinating. I was very eager to experience the drug that sounded so wonderful to me. We asked them where we could get it. So me and 2 of my guy friends walked up the road and picked a few of the pods, round green prickly pods right out of someone's front yard. At first, we thought the boy had told us to take only 2 seeds, so all 5 of us took 2 seeds each and waited about a half hour. Well, a half hour later, we all realized nothing had happened. We were all just as we were prior to taking the yellow seeds, so one of the boys called up the other kid and said, "Look, we each ate 2 seeds and nothing has happened." The kid told us we were supposed to eat 1 or 2 pods, so we went back and got more. The boys were skeptical about it, so me and my friend, a girl, ate a pod each. There had to be at least over 100 seeds inside. I was scared after doing this, so I decided to get dropped off at home before the plant has kicked in, just in case the trip I was about to experience wasn't what I wanted. I was so happy I decided to get dropped off when I did. About a half hour to an hour later, I started feeling a little out of place, still sober, but not quite with it. I had walked around my house, stumbling into walls, laughing, thinking this is fun. Then I found my way into the bathroom, and that is where the worst experience of my life began. I didn't feel right at all, so I decided to try and sleep. I would lay down for like 3 seconds and get up real fast, then lay down again and get up, tossing and turning, not knowing what to do. I went back to the bathroom and crawled around on all 4s in a circle, for this was the only thing calming me down. I looked at my arms. They were beet red. I finally got up and walked down the hall. Next thing I know, I fell out front of my grandmother's bedroom door and her door swung open. My aunt and grandmother came rushing out of their rooms asking me what I was on, but I had no idea and couldn't even think straight. My aunt told me to lay down, but all I could do was crawl in that one big circle as I was doing before. I don't remember what happened next, but my grandmother told me my aunt came in my room looking for me, but I had made my way into the bathroom. My pants were down to my ankles and there was blood everywhere. They drove me to the hospital for they didn't know if I had already overdosed or if I went to sleep would I wake up. They said as I was on the lawn while they were trying to get me into the car, I would just stand there and look at the lights on the car and kept saying, "Aw, look at the pretty lights." They had taken me to the hospital, which I have no recollection of, and they said that I kept walking behind the nurse's station insisting that I had dropped something, that I wouldn't get into the wheelchair, that I kept trying to grab things that weren't there, that I was grabbing onto the doctor's leg. I swore I was asleep the whole time, but they told me I was awake. They said I was cursing at everyone, telling the nurses that I would fuck them up. The doctor came into my room yelling at me, saying I'm not the only patient they have, and I would yell at him saying, "Did I ask for you people to come to my rescue?" I remember I couldn't comprehend I was in a hospital. I kept asking my mom, why did Grandma rearrange her bedroom? But my mom kept trying to explain that I was in fact in the emergency room. I thought there were bugs all over my bed, that the railing of the bed were snakes. I thought all my friends were in the room, but it was only me and my mom. I thought the wall behind me was all cuckoo clocks or clocks you would see in like a Dr. Seuss movie or something. I kept trying to rip out my IVs or jump out of bed that they had to keep calling security. I remember freaking out on security, asking him, why are you in my bedroom? Get out. And I remember him saying, if you get back in bed, I'll leave, okay? And I said, sure, whatever. I got back in bed, but sure enough, he didn't leave. Then I remember there was one nurse I absolutely hated. Every time she came near me, I'd start screaming. I kept thinking I was smoking a cigarette, and every time I opened my eyes, it would just vanish. Then they came in with a cup of charcoal and tried making me drink it, and there was one nurse there who I liked, but only one. Every other nurse or doctor who came near me, I'd start freaking out. The nurse I liked promised me if I drank the charcoal, she would go smoke a cigarette with me, but I didn't drink it, and they had to stick the tube down my nose, twice. 6 doctors and nurses are holding me down as I'm screaming and pushing in my bed. The pain was unbearable. I had finally calmed down after they did that, then I kept having to pee because everything you drink just goes right through you. My mom told me I got so bad that I wouldn't even wipe myself. I would just throw the toilet paper and I kept trying to flush the toilet, but it was one of those toilets that can't flush that just sit at the side of the bed. My heart rate was 150, and from there I got sent to the Children's Hospital in West Philly. The hallucinations lasted for 2 days, and I couldn't even read the menu to order the food they wanted me to. I swore the hospital was playing music that you would hear on the radio, like Young Jock or Dr. Dre and stuff like that. Through the middle of the night, my heart rate went down to 40. I would get really dizzy and dehydrated. I was in the hospital for 3 days. And I'm always the type of person who does a drug and says, oh, I'll never do that again, then go back and do it the next day. But Datura is a drug I assure you I will never come in contact with again. And I hope no one ever gets the urge to try it, because I'm one of the lucky ones who has no permanent damage from this. Thank God. I'm pretty experienced when it comes to mind-altering substances, and I see a positive side to even the most seemingly pointless ones, except Datura. I have done it twice. Both times were unpleasant and dangerous, with very noticeable health problems coming from it. The first time I ate all the seeds from one pod, about 250. I don't remember it kicking in. I remember eating them, then wondering if it was even going to work while smoking a cigarette on the couch. I remember brief segments of the experience, like smoking some bud and getting extremely bad cotton mouth, forcing my throat to close up, making it hard to breathe. I remember smoking a cigarette, looking closer at it, and having it disappear. Finally, I remember passing out next to my friend having a hard time breathing still. The second time I did it, I ate 300 plus seeds at a rave and ended up in the parking lot pulling windshield wipers off of cars to collect them or something, so my friends tell me. I was a danger to myself, and my friends all had to restrain me and keep me in their car. My friend told me I turned blue in my face and acted like I couldn't breathe. I actually remember that, and it scares me a lot to think I almost died. The same restriction of breathing happened the first time, but to a lesser extent. That's all I remember from the 2 times I tried the substance. Neither experience was fun, and both were very dangerous. I couldn't see well for about a week afterwards, and reading was impossible. I first heard of Jimson weed in the book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Later on, I found out that the goats that my parents owned when I was a young child were believed to have been poisoned by Jimson weed due to the fact that before they died, they were filmed by the local university walking around in circles, blind. The first time I came in contact with it was after viewing pictures of the plant on Arrowhead, and soon after discovering many plants growing on a friend of mine's property. Day 1, I eat a total of 2 seed pods. My mouth is dry, but I don't know it until I try to eat something. I feel tired, so I lie down, but I can't sleep. I get back up because my friend Josh is sleepy, so I let him have the bed. I walk outside to smoke a joint. I suddenly find myself nodding in agreement to whatever Josh was saying to me. He was sitting next to me. I turn my head away from him to take another drag of the joint and turn to pass it to him, but Josh is not there. He was never there. He has been in my bed sleeping. This takes a second to register. It seemed like at the time it was no big deal that I just completely hallucinated a human being sitting next to me. Day 2, I boil 2 leaves and 2 flowers in 1 cup of water. Does not taste bad at first, but toward the end of the cup it is hard to take in. About 20 minutes, I'm feeling kind of drunk. I sit down on the couch to watch TV to wait for it to kick in the rest of the way. It never does, or so I thought. I suddenly realized that I've been watching TV for over an hour, but I never watched TV really, so why was I watching it for so long? I walk outside to smoke a cigarette. When I return, my little brother is sitting on the couch, so I decide to have a chat with him. Mistake. I soon find myself talking about random bullshit that quickly switches to a completely different thing every sentence because I forgot whatever I was going to say before. This happened over and over again and began to frustrate me. I could not finish 2 sentences without totally forgetting anything I was just telling him about. No trace whatsoever. Just gone, lost in the abyss of time and space. He notices this and starts getting annoyed, tells me I'm on LSD in a very threatened narc tone of voice. I feel like I should clear things up, make him not believe such a thing so I can retreat to my room for a little Floyd and some doors, paranoia free. Mistake. I'm suddenly talking about invading gypsies with slingshots. One of them shot me in the hand, the bitch, making a golf ball size hole that I can see through my palm. Boy, did it hurt. I wanted to kill her, I did. My brother wants to see the scars, grabs my hand. No scars, but I don't know why. It went right through my hand, I'm telling you, honest. I'm puzzled. Where did the scars go? I then speak of climbing the radio tower. I really did this, but it was weeks before. You can fall. If you fall, you die. The tower wobbles. It sure does. The rest I cannot remember. My brother wants to know what the fuck I'm talking about. Day 3. I decide to introduce my friends to Datura. I boil a brew of about 7 leaves and 5 flowers. I'm the only one that drinks it for the most part. They didn't like the taste, so they only drank half a cup. I drank 3. Same stuff, dry mouth, drunk feeling. I get tired, so I lie down. Then, I'm suddenly awake. My body is like iron. It is an effort to even move. I feel incredibly disoriented. I walk outside to get some air, passing my friend who says something to me. I reply, but it's such an effort to move my jaw to talk that my words come out jarbled and deep-voiced. When I'm outside, my perception of distance is so fucked up I fall down in front of the porch stairs, catching myself on the top stair every time I try to climb them. I proceed to walk in and outside over and over. I can't make up my mind. When I finally get back inside, it's time to sleep. I walk into his little brother's room, but there's no bed in the corner. Where's the bed? I search around, no bed. I search the rest of his house thinking maybe they moved the bed. I'm frustrated now. Where the fuck did the bed go? No such luck, so I sleep in his closet. I awake the next day to realize there was never any bed in the corner. There is at my house, but not his. Things in common in each experience were that I could never piss. I don't know if I never had to, but thought I did, or that I did, but could not. Also, I got tired, but I never slept. It was almost like dying. I seemed to lie down to let my current world and body die, only to get up after in a new dark world. A world of a constant state of discomfort and dark perception. Each time I hallucinated, but the hallucinations were true, not just walls breathing or colors changing hue, but actually seeing and speaking with things that were not even there. Also, there was no noise, just silence. Datura is a very strange drug. What I am about to describe is an account of something really stupid I did, and I don't recommend that anyone do it, but perhaps you can learn a thing or two from reading this. I had done a lot of mushrooms and some Datura in the past, and I wanted to see what would happen if I combined the two. Datura alone is a serious drug. It can kill you if you take too much. And the strange thing about it is that you don't know you're under its influence when it kicks in, no matter how much you try to prepare yourself.
When I have done it, it has put me in a state I would compare to being asleep and dreaming vividly, but definitely not lucidly. And the difficulty in remembering the dreams and maintaining logical sequences of thoughts is roughly as it is when dreaming, only I'm walking around and trying to do things. Mushrooms I found to generally be a highly emotional experience. When I take them, I go through extreme changes in emotion very quickly, and I'm often empowered by feelings of compassion. The hallucinations seem to be secondary to that, or perhaps even a ramification of it. So what would happen if I put them both together? I wanted to try it, but didn't have anyone around to watch me, or at least not anyone I felt comfortable telling I was experimenting with drugs. I was living with my parents at the time. This was in 2001. So I got the idea that perhaps if I also took some Zyprexa, an antipsychotic that makes me lethargic and slow, I'd be less likely to get in trouble. So I threw unmeasured amounts of Datura, psilocybin mushrooms, and Zyprexa in a blender and blended them into a homogeneous powder. I'd say the mixture was about half Datura, a quarter mushrooms, and a quarter Zyprexa. First, I tried putting a teaspoon of the stuff in some tea. The effects were mild, yet suggestive of a great insanity, if that makes any sense. My body was tingling a lot and I was laughing a lot, but at the same time, it was somewhat frightening. I put the stuff in a bag and forgot about it for a while. Then, one day in 2003, I was visiting my parents and everyone had gone to bed. I was bored out of my mind and decided I was going to get fucked up. I ate about 4 tablespoons of the mixture and lied on my bed waiting for something to happen. I fell asleep and woke up feeling horribly dehydrated. I went in the bathroom and was trying to drink water out of the faucet, desperately, but could barely get it down my throat because it kept closing. When my throat closed, I couldn't even breathe. There must have been 40-second intervals where I couldn't open my throat even to get a breath in, and I thought I might suffocate. I kept trying to get myself to calm down and control my body, which is something I'm usually good at, but I could not get my throat to open properly. It was simply too dry. Trying to drink water made this even worse, but I thought that I might die if I didn't get some water in my system. So I kept choking and burping on the water for a long time until I managed to moisten my throat enough that I could drink. I downed as much water as I could. I remember the image of myself in the mirror being extremely bright and dangerous looking, and I was exhausted. I lied down on the bathroom floor and must have fallen asleep. At some point, I must have gone back to my bed. I remember waking up multiple times, needing to drink more water and having the throat closing problem again. Plus, I could barely walk. And I felt like I was in the middle of an intense dream, but the main priority was to make sure I could breathe and make sure I had enough water in my body. I kept trying to go into the bathroom and I would try to take a step forward and I'd fall to the side, then try to compensate and fall to the other side. I was knocking over furniture and falling all over the place and making a lot of noise. The rest is a delirious blur, and my mom, who is pretty much against any kind of drug use, had to see me like that. Obviously, I woke up my whole family knocking into bookshelves and bureaus and things. I remember slurring to them that I was just drunk and that I had drank way too much. The next day, my dad told me he had never seen anyone so drunk in his life, and my mom told me I was sitting next to her on her bed for a while, silently. She kept asking me questions and I answered her logically and literally. Then I asked her where my bed was and she told me, and I tried to get to it by going through the wall in the back of a closet. When I woke up the next day, sometime in the afternoon, I felt back to normal again, except that I still had to drink a lot of water, and my vision was blurry for at least another 24 hours. This didn't scare me much because I had read that Datura does that, and that it would wear off eventually.
I was at my friend's house and decided to try out angel trumpets. I had heard of where a tree was and went to go get 2 flowers, a bud of a flower and 5 or 10 leaves. I put about 2 cups of water in a pot and boiled all the shit for about 20 minutes. I stained out the solids. What was left was a yellowish liquid. There was only a glass left now, and I drank a bit more than half of it. Half an hour later, I got kinda sleepy, and after that, I had the worst fucking cotton mouth of my life. I felt kind of dizzy and started getting a little confused. All of a sudden, I had to take a piss, but it was the hardest thing ever. It took me about 20 minutes to finish taking the piss. After that, it was a big fucking roller coaster ride. I did not know what day it was. I asked my friend if it's today, yesterday, or tomorrow. I could swear that I had cups, pencils, or shit like that in my hand, but when I went to use them, they were gone. I kept seeing people that weren't there, and when they were gone, I asked where they went. About 3 hours later, I decided to walk to my friend Jay's house. I was walking down the road talking to him, but he wasn't there. That was when the weirdest shit happened. I looked at the wall by the sidewalk and saw my friend walking towards me. He stepped out the wall and I asked, "What's up?" He looked at me, turned his head once or twice, and then melted back into the wall. I was amazed. A couple steps later, I heard him call me, turned around and yelled, "What?" He looked at me, turned around, and then disappeared again into the wall. After that, I saw something on the ground. It was a cat. I went up to pet it and it melted into a sprinkler head. I saw the same cat about 5 more times, and each time it was different shit. I got really confused, but kept on walking. All of a sudden, I heard a scooter and it pulled up beside me. It was my friend Lil B. He said, "What's up?" and then I said, "What's up?" And then I was ready to ask him for a ride, and then he vaporized into thin air. This was pretty weird. About 20 yards later was the scariest visual. My dad appeared in front of me. I stopped moving. He asked me what the fuck I was on. I got real scared, held my breath, and closed my eyes for 3 seconds. When I opened them, he was gone. The rest of the night, I kept seeing people and animals that weren't there and kept thinking I was in different places. I've done shrooms, I've done acid, I've done mescaline, and I've done Dramamine. This shit was definitely the craziest. I suppose you'd say we were a ragtag group of punks, skaters, and wooks that coexisted within the same circle of friends. There were about a dozen of us who lived together in a 2-bedroom apartment that was rented to our friend Jason Burns, the only one of us at the time who was responsible enough to have a job delivering pizzas and paying rent. The rest of us between the ages of 18 through 20 were still sort of just floating through life, avoiding anything that resembled adulting. One day, 6 of us were hanging out at Danielle's house, a girl we had met about a week prior. Her folks were out of town for the weekend. She thought it would be a good idea to have us over. Her parents' house was located in the Woodward Park neighborhood, a middle to upper class community of Fresno, California. This house was more in the upper class area. White plush carpets, white couches, beautiful vases, high vaulted ceilings with extraordinary lighting features. It seemed like everything was pure white in this house. Super fancy, you get the idea. Around 3 p.m., a few of us walked to a nearby grocery store for drinks and snacks. We cut through a field of plowed dirt and weeds along the way to make the trip shorter. Myself being an avid user of psilocybin cubensis and LSD in those days, as well as my mother having given me numerous Carlos Castaneda books when I was a kid, certainly helped me to identify various other hallucinogenic plants. As we crossed through this field, I recognized a familiar one growing all around us, Datura. We collected a bunch of the seed pods, filled our backpacks, and took them back to Danielle's house. We sat at a table on the back patio and cut open the pods, removing the light golden brown seeds and collecting them in a large cooking pot. It measured about 12 by 8 inches tall or so. We filled the bottom 2 inches with seeds and the rest of the pot with water. We heated those up for about an hour, creating a very foul-smelling tea of sorts. The 6 of us, plus Danielle, and another girl she had over, all filled glasses or cups to about 10 ounces and began sipping this stuff. This formula was entirely made up on the spot. We didn't have Google to refer to. This is absolutely not how anyone should ever take Datura. It was disgusting and almost impossible to get down, so we decided to pour it all back in the pot and take other measures. We found frozen strawberries in the freezer and a canned fruit cocktail in the cupboards. Poured some Datura tea in a blender, and added in the fruit to create a very heinous kind of smoothie. Lee, Doug, and myself were the last 3 people to pull the remaining pulpy tea from the bottom of the pot and pour it into the blender with the fruit to make our glasses. I believe the bottom of the pot had to be the most potent, judging by the 3 of our reactions to it compared to the remainder of the group. I sat on the far right end of an L-shaped sectional couch in the living room. To my left was Lee. Across from us in chairs sat Doug, Mike, Jason, Jeremy, and the 2 girls. Roughly about 8 to 10 minutes after drinking my glass, I began to notice some unusual sensations starting in my stomach and my face. My stomach felt grumbled and warm. My face felt flush. I turned to my left and told Lee, "I think I'm fucked up, Lee." He asked, "What do you mean?" I went on to explain how I was feeling and told him that I think I might have drank too much. He said, "I think I did too. I believe I drank about 8 ounces of pulpy Jimson weed that was blended with fruit to mask the taste." The very next thing I recall was projectile vomiting directly out in front of me, blasting outwards 3 feet forward all over that plush white carpet. I was wearing shorts. Leaning over now, I began to puke down my shins. Socks and shoes coated in vomit. It's running down my legs. It's everywhere. I leaned back and to my right, my face went into the arm of the couch. This all occurred at around 9 p.m., as the sun hadn't been down that long when we drank our portions. The very next memory I have, I was walking down the middle of a residential street. My memory just sort of fades into where I'm walking. I don't remember leaving anywhere. I don't remember making the decision to walk anywhere. My memory just went from puking to walking down the middle of the street. The sky was shifting from black to dark blue. The sun would be rising soon. We were all walking together, side by side. No cars really out yet. We're now in Tarpey Village, a neighborhood about 9 miles away from Danielle's house, where our trip began. I realized we were on my friend Trista's street, and I saw her house on the left. We went up and knocked on the door. She answered, and we were talking. I'm not even sure what about. Didn't seem too long after that, a police car pulls up across the street. The officer gets out and walks right up to me. He forcibly turns me around and puts me in handcuffs and walks me to his car. He then puts me in the back seat and gets in the front seat himself. The officer then turns his head over his shoulder and asks me, "What are you on?" To which I answer, "I'm not on anything." He then said, "All right, well, we'll just wait for the ambulance then." I asked, "Ambulance? I'm not hurt. Why would I need an ambulance?" He said, "Just hang tight. They'll be here soon." The ambulance arrives and he takes me out of the back seat and they lay me down face first on a gurney. They put some form of straps in place over my lower back and ankles, and after removing the cuffs, they strap my wrists and head down as well. I don't recall being combative at all during this encounter. I asked the officer as they're loading me up in the ambulance if one of my friends can ride with me. The officer laughs at me and says, "No, your friends will have to stay here." I don't recall any of the ride, but I am, at some point, now on my back on some other type of gurney, with my right wrist bound to the corner in what seems like a leather restraint. My left ankle is bound to the foot of the bed, just the same. Doctors come in every once in a while and ask what year it is, who is the president, where are you? I feel like I'm nailing it. Bill Clinton, Valley Medical Center, 1995. Off and on, I notice to my left across the room that there is a Hispanic man who has been stabbed by his girlfriend, from what he says. He's strapped down the same way as I am, and he's often telling me to shut the fuck up, though I don't feel like I've said anything to him at all. I observe very clearly with my eyes at some point my friend Nate standing with one foot on the arm of my bed and the other foot on the arm of the Hispanic man's bed. He's got a screwdriver and he's unscrewing the speakers from the ceiling. Nate was a clever thief in these days. It seemed fitting. What seems like several hours after I arrived, they made a call to my mother. They asked her, "Does your son have psychotic episodes?" She said, "No, never." So they tell her I'm probably okay enough that she can come get me. They cut me loose from the bed and escort me into another room where my mother and aunt are waiting. My mother hugs me and starts asking questions. The hospital staff hand me some forms to sign and they give me a sock and my belt. This sock was one that I had never seen in my life. It has a last name embroidered on it or something. It seems fancy, maybe something a golfer would wear. I don't know. All I know for sure, it's not mine and they're trying to send me home without my shoes. I just bought a pair of Etnies that cost me $90, and though I spaced the fact that I had puked on them the night before, I knew I wasn't leaving without my damn shoes. They insisted that I came with nothing other than that one stupid sock. Finally, I took the sock. Angry, I just wanted to get out of the hospital, so I went to my mother's house barefooted. I called the apartment that we all lived in, and Jeremy answered, "Lupo! What the fuck happened, dude? Where'd you go?" He said. "What do you mean, where'd I go? Why didn't one of you guys come with me to the hospital?" "What the fuck are you talking about?" he asks. I'm confused at this point because he should know full well what I'm talking about. He was there and saw the ambulance take me. He then interjects with a summary to try and clear things up for me. Look, you were face down in the arm of the couch all night. We were off in another room. At some point someone says, Lupo is gone, but we didn't figure you went very far because your shoes were by the door. I stopped him there. What? You have my shoes? He then says, no. They're still by that door. They had puke all over them. Fuck that. Confused by everything, I decided to call Trista, the girl whose door I was arrested at earlier that morning. She answers and I ask her, hey, why exactly was I arrested last night? Do you know? She then says, huh? So I ask again, why was I arrested last night? What did I do? She goes on to say, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, Lupo. I haven't seen you in maybe 3 weeks. You got arrested? Now my head is completely fucked. My mother has her friend, who is a 911 dispatcher, to look into my arrest in their system, and informs my mom that the call came in that a man was approaching houses in the Woodward Park area early in the AM, looking in windows and knocking on doors. Holy shit. Everything comes together now in my head. I can't remember any of it, but I can only do the math one way. Apparently, I must have pulled myself from that couch in a daze, took my pukey shoes and socks off, leaving me in need of replacements. I made my way into Danielle's parents' room and located one of her father's socks, settling on just one sock, I guess. I made my half-barefooted, half-socked way down the residential street in Danielle's upscale neighborhood. I began knocking on random windows and doors, offering up what I can only imagine to be colorful and friendly 5:52 a.m. conversation to the upper class just around the corner from where I first started out. I never made it anywhere near Trista's house in Tarpey Village 9 miles away. I never spoke to her in person that morning. I thought that I was with all my friends, but I was really alone at strangers' doors. It's no wonder the cop laughed at me. I called Jeremy back and gave him my updated hypothesis of my experience, and he then filled me in on what else took place while I was face planted in the couch and later gone on my one-socked solo spirit quest. As it went, every single person who consumed the Datura cocktail ended up vomiting somewhere in the house. Puke fucking everywhere. Doug was seeing dimensionally flip-flopped, so a corner in a room appeared as a sharp edge corner, say like one on the right as you enter a hallway. That would have been fine, except the sharp edge corners appeared as inverted corners in a room that you couldn't hurt yourself on. Needless to say, Doug busted his face up real bad on those inverted corners, leaving bloodstains all about the house walls. Doug later found a tree that was crafted of silk and I don't know what else, but it was real fancy-like and it reached way up towards the vaulted ceilings until he decided to climb it. So now we have shreds of silk fabric from what was some kind of decorative tree all strewn about the house. Puke on the white carpets. I guess they weren't white, but they were like as close as you could get for a carpet. Jason decided to puke in one of the vases and then made his way into the restroom where Mike was sitting on the toilet, both shitting and puking down the floor in front of him. Jason told Mike, "I need to piss." Mike told him he was stuck and there was no way he could manage to stand up or get off the toilet to allow Jason to piss. Jason then rationalized that the one choice he was left with was pissing as close to the toilet as possible, that being the puddle of Mike's puke on the floor. I'm not sure what the next line of thought was that went through Jason's mind, but our best guess is that it went something like this. If puke were a fire, and my urine can extinguish fires, there are other fires throughout this house, including the one I left in that vase, so I must now try to piss on all those puddles of puke. And he did a pretty good job of that. So we have puke everywhere, a lot of piss in or around the areas where the puke has ended up, shreds of silk strewn about, blood on the walls, and apparently they found Danielle's father's shotguns while rummaging through the house, and I'm really surprised nobody was hurt. Jeremy found a briefcase that belonged to Danielle's mother and proclaimed to everyone that it was stacked with hundreds of thousands of dollars, like in the movies. They broke the locks on it and found only work documents and files, to which he then explained to them were top secret documents and gave them the whole story behind their existence. At some point in the night, our friends Matt, Ashton, and Joram arrived. They were not on the Datura T, and they spent the rest of the night trying to babysit us, but it was all in vain. Too many of us going different ways, fucking up too many things for them to keep up. It's so funny to listen to their telling of the events because they had a completely sober viewing of it all. Matt told me later that they had made a trip to 7-Eleven to get one of those giant fountain drinks with the folding cardboard lid, like a huge milk carton. We were all pretty broken these days, so sharing a large soda among a group was certainly a thing. Anyway, they're getting the soda at 7-Eleven, and a couple super cute girls start chatting them up. They want to hang out with my friends, but my friends are like, "Fuck, we really want to, but we're babysitting a bunch of adults right now, and they're fucking shit up, we gotta get back to them." So they arrive with that huge vat of soda, and Matt says it's the one thing that broke me from that couch. He said I immediately sat up looking at him, just a solid stare, very serious, and he asked me, "Lupo, do you want a drink of this?" Laughing because it's so obvious I do. Datura gives you horrible cottonmouth. Weed cottonmouth isn't even cottonmouth, that's just dry. Datura, it fucks your mouth up. He offers the soda. Apparently, I nod yes and put my hands out to take the cup from him. He puts it in my hands, and I guess I just didn't have any motor skills at all. I drop it. It burst open on the floor below, and now nobody gets a drink now. I didn't fully get my eyesight back for 3 days following the trip. It was really blurry when I would try to read, and I was still seeing the occasional person in the room with me who wasn't really there at all. Sometimes I still wonder who the people were at the house I was arrested at, and what would have been going through their minds. Did they run into me at a store a couple years later, perhaps? "Honey, look! It's that guy, that crazy barefooted one-sock guy that was beating on our door at the crack of dawn that one time. Look, he has a wife and kids. He's trying to act all normal now." Datura anoxia, that's one hell of a drug. I highly do not recommend anyone trying it. You never want to do something that will completely remove all of your motor skills, wipe large segments of your memory, and make you hallucinate so intensely that you actually see humans and other things that aren't actually standing there. You actually feel things in your hand that you're not holding as well. That shit is just too much. I could have been taken out by a car while walking in the street, if that's even where I was walking. Yeah, I just really need to stress to you that you'd certainly want to avoid ever giving thought to trying that shit. Look up Datura trips online and try to find a story that's pleasant and calm. You really can't. I'm an experienced tripper. In fact, my first drug experience was peyote. I'm not a heavy user by any means, 2 to 3 times a year. I'm a fairly regular pot smoker, and though I don't drink a lot, I'm an avid lover of beer. Hallucinogens are my love though, and I don't consider them just recreational. For the most part, they are done camping with friends. Tripping is supposed to be a spiritual experience that can be fun, but mainly I consider it to be a reboot of my system. That being said, Datura is now officially off the list of camping supplies. I did my homework. I read about the bad experiences and thought to myself, I'll do this smart. One thing I noticed about the bad experiences was that they usually involve people who regularly use drugs and led unhealthy lifestyles. I don't. Also, people usually seem to be in an urban environment where police presence can be summoned. That was being avoided. I also made sure I had plenty of water. I was not going to smoke any pot or drink. The dose I was using was considerably lower than most of the bad story doses. I didn't officially have any sitters, but my friends were all with me. They were using mushrooms and not Datura. I've tripped with all of them before and trusted their abilities to separate reality from mythology if things got a little too hairy. My mistake was having read a great deal of Robert E. Howard the week prior, Conan, Cole, Bran McMorn, etc. After ingestion, I didn't get the drunk feeling as bad as most people do. I was in fairly good shape. I did start getting the effects quickly though. The dark woods provided a lot of shapes. I surprised and probably scared my friends half to death when I suddenly took up the camp machete and went to do glorious battle with the attacking savages. Of this, I have little recollection. I had been lucid for quite some time, but near dusk, the battle began. This is what my friend described. You went from talking about pygmy tribes and the Yeti into, "They're here!" You jumped up from your log, grabbed the machete, ran through the fire and into the tree line, hacking everything in sight. We were too scared to come to you. In fact, we were worried that you were going to start thinking we were orcs too, so we left. My friends literally fled into the woods to get away from me. I don't remember much until I came across a dead animal, which could have been a whale or a unicorn or a megalotherium, for all I know. I spent a lot of time fighting Picts or Danes or whatever. I read a lot of fantasy books and played magic cards, so goblins, Murgos, Viashinos, Skullbearers, Trolls, Gnolls, and a whole other assorted menagerie of evil was out to get me. Somehow, I wandered into a swamp and lost my sword. My friends found me hours later. It wasn't hard. I left a trail of hacked brush and I was screaming quite loudly. I have vivid memories of terrible things coming out of the dark for me. The scary thing was, for the several hours I was alone, I didn't drink anything. Luckily, I was only a half a mile from camp. I didn't recognize my two friends when they came for me. I thought the flashlights were witch balls. I fought with them a little, before I realized they were real and had water. I'm sure that I had pissed myself and was real glad to get dry clothes on back at camp. I was in and out of lucid dreams the whole night. I basically ruined their buzz, but being true friends, they found me more amusing than asshole-horrific. I still get dogged about that weekend, but I've been forgiven. However, in addition to the 4-day hangover, I cannot shake the uneasy fear that I could have killed somebody or myself. I literally was a delusional nut, running around with a dangerous weapon in the woods. I could have fell on it. I shudder every time I think of that weekend. Given a choice between doing Datura again or eating an entire sheet of acid, I would eat the sheet. Datura is not something to be fucked with, and I'm a healthy, sane person with hallucinogenic experience. My advice, you probably are not strong enough for it, and if you are, you better not have a violent bone in your body or you can flip out easily. Have sober sitters that will absolutely not permit you to be anywhere near dangerous places or objects, or just don't do it, because the hangover sucks, and it really isn't all that fun. I am 23 years old and will pay for this mistake for longer than I would like to admit. The courts say 2 years. Let this be a sign of things to come in this story. This story may not flow very well, but my memory of the events that occurred doesn't flow right either. For the record, I think I ate anywhere between 2 and 3 seed pods to myself in a 4 or 5 hour window. It is July 20th, 2006 in Colorado. I was celebrating getting a new apartment. I had brought some friends up from Denver to party with me. Normally I tend to stick with marijuana as my recreational party item, but this day was different. My friend had said that she spotted some Jimson weed outside. I had asked what it was. She told me it was a psychedelic, so 3 of us decided to have some. I had made some fried chicken and all the fixins, and we ate some seeds. We didn't feel anything after 45 minutes except for a body high. We all decided to eat a little more. We all figured that 45 minutes was enough to digest and process the seeds. Man, were we wrong. Things get fuzzy at 2 hours into the trip. Here is all that I remember. I can recall being out on my back patio, staring into the river that ran behind my place. A green and black spider, about 5 feet tall, with legs the size of small trees, wandered towards me. I wasn't scared because I remember that I was tripping. I was amazed when the spider morphed into 3 gold impalas which bounded off. I went inside to have a cigarette and got restless. My neighbor, whom I had known for a little while, perhaps 2 months, came down and we partied with some herbal refreshment of the green and sticky kind. After maybe a bowl or 2, I know I left to do something, but I haven't had a clue what. Maybe it was a short walk around my building, due to being restless, and I returned to my place. My neighbor left a few minutes after I got back. I got the brilliant idea to have some more seeds after returning. It was at this point that after the seeds hit me, I blacked out, and I have no idea what happened. I wandered around as far as I know for a while longer. Here is where I get the shock of the evening. The next memory I have besides the constant movement of cigarettes is that of my friends saying that the cops were there and they wanted to see me. I go outside thinking to myself, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. I am way too fucked up to talk to the cops. So I walk up to the cop and try to introduce myself as best as I could. He asks me, "Have you been up to my neighbor's apartment today?" I respond with something along the lines of, "No." He then tells me that my neighbor said I walked into her apartment and was staring at a wall while mumbling to myself. She asked me to leave, at which point I did. The cop also said that she saw me in her car looking for something. I denied that as well. That didn't matter to the cops because the soberish neighbor says that I did and she wants to press charges. I was told from the police when I was sober that during the ride to jail from the back seat, I was singing, "We're going for a ride! We're going for a ride!" While in jail, I remember EMS checking me out. They said I was with it mentally enough that I was no longer a danger to myself or anybody else. My vitals were fine, so they allowed me to deny treatment and a trip to the hospital. My pupils were blown and my pulse was slightly fast, but other than that, I was fine. Such bullshit though. The truth of the matter was I was farther from just fine. I was farther than anyone could have thought. I sat in a fucking chair for a whole day, talking to imaginary people and real people alike. Everybody must have thought I was crazy. The end result was that I had trespassing in the 1st and 2nd degree pressed on me. I went to jail to detox until I bonded out, I think 3 days later. I had my 1st degree trespass deferred for 2 years, and I had to plead guilty to the 2nd degree trespass charge to get the deferred plea bargain. I regret this day more than any other day in my life. If I could have my way, this plant would be made extinct. This plant has no real use in society, thus it should be destroyed. How does one defend their actions in court if they can't remember what the hell they were doing? To this day, I still wonder if it ever happened. All I know for sure is that I'm a dumbass for doing what I did, and I hope that I have not caused any permanent psychological dysfunction to the victims of my crime, if it even happened. It was an incredibly bad experience. During a senior graduation trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, I knew I wanted to party with my classmates, but I'd never been one to drink alcohol. Instead, someone I considered a friend had offered me seeds which were claimed to be from a morning glory plant, and I planned to perform a crude LSA extraction. I soaked 180 seeds in water for a day and then heated them in a small pan with vodka to about 200 degrees. I let the mixture cool and mixed it into a water bottle. I drank the contents. It was slightly sweet, yet noticeably bitter, somewhat like a cherry that had soured and been dipped in a bitterant. The concoction felt powerful as I ingested it, and I was filled with an anticipatory dread similar to the time I first smelled ayahuasca. I was in the passenger seat rolling a blunt on a frisbee as we drove to the main street in North Myrtle Beach on a pleasant Monday in June 2009. The car stopped as we arrived at our destination, and I essentially collapsed out of the passenger seat, spilling the contents of the frisbee on the sidewalk, all while a marked police car was 2 parking spots ahead. Although the officer was getting out of his car, he seemed not to notice, and I was ushered into the house. My vision closed in as I was walking up the wraparound porch steps to the 3rd-story beach house. This was my last memory for almost 48 hours. The rest of the story has been corroborated by multiple friends, witnesses, and the police report. My behavior was consistently inappropriate and hostile. I was forced to leave the house party, and some friends took me to a hotel lobby bathroom to hide me and try to communicate with me. I escaped the bathroom, but I could hardly walk and laid down on the hotel lobby floor. The front desk attendant stated he would call the police as I was drunk and disorderly. Someone threw a 2-liter bottle of soda from a landing a few stories up that almost hit my head, and when orange soda exploded all over the lobby floor, we were chased out of the hotel. At this point, my friends left me, and I was told I wandered onto the beach sometime after dark. The police report states that I was standing in the middle of the main drag in my underwear, soaked with seawater, directing traffic while holding a dead fish that I must have found in a chum bucket on the beach. I was arrested by Officer P, and while I was sitting handcuffed on the curb, I slurred, "What did I do, officer? Did I get you pregnant?" Apparently there are some sexual overtones to this drug. It was at this point that she miraculously realized that I was not drunk, but in fact poisoned and in immediate need of paramedics. I was transported to the hospital and given antipsychotic medication, of which I unfortunately can't remember the name, but it absolutely saved my life. The first glimpse of consciousness I had was waking up in a bright hospital room with a catheter and IV lines. I must have removed these because the next thing I remember is running down a hallway in my hospital gown and swinging open exit doors. I made it a few hundred feet into the parking lot before security apprehended me and escorted me back to my hospital room. Apparently, I made other attempts at escape until I was handcuffed to my bed and an officer or nurse was directed to watch me around the clock. After some 2 days in the hospital, I convinced the staff that my drink had been spiked, and no charges were filed against me as I had no other drugs in my system. Thus, the hospital classified my episode as an accidental poisoning. I also convinced them that I was no longer hallucinating. Our class president came and picked me up as I was discharged from the hospital on Thursday. I was convinced there were strangers in the back seat of the van and opened the door in order to jump out of the moving vehicle. My friend restrained me, pulled over, and graciously let me inspect the vehicle before continuing to drive me back to our campsite. I saw countless animals and people that did not exist for the next day. Although my consciousness had returned, my sanity had not. I ran from imaginary creatures and hid behind trees, crawled under cars, and sobbed in my tent. I swam in the ocean and shrieked on the beach when I felt I was being attacked by a flock of imaginary birds. My antics were primarily confined to the time after sunset because direct sunlight was incredibly painful to my eyes. By the 5th day, the hallucinations had ceased. I went out on the last night of this week-long bacchanalia with the friends that had, for the most part, ensured my survival, until they were fed up with my antics and let me roam a dark beach while experiencing true delusional hallucinations. That night, I heard endless accounts of my actions. I actually ran into my arresting officer on the sidewalk, and she asked if I was feeling better. If someone claims to have identified a plant that contains LSA such as morning glory, be aware that it could be in fact a deadly Datura seed pod. Since this trip, I have gone on to study botany and horticulture, specifically plant toxicity as it relates to pest control. I wrote a research paper on Datura and have participated in clinical studies of actual psychedelics. I will never, ever ingest a nightshade again. I do not condone the recreational use of Datura at all. It's horrible. So kids, there is no need to eat Datura. Stay the fuck away from it. And if you decide to try it, even after reading this report, and or countless other train wreck experiences, then you are as fucking dumb as I am. My friend C, a longtime tripper, gets right into all this kind of stuff, only because he knows how to control Datura, and keeps himself pretty composed on the drug. He gave me a briefing on it, and it seemed pretty wild, so I thought, fuck it, why not give it a go? You only live once, I told myself before I drank that awful stuff. But that quote can also imply that saying jumping off a bridge or forcing yourself inside a meat grinder is a good idea, and it's not. But anyways, one Saturday afternoon, we missioned off to the bottom of Mount Nelson in Tasmania and collected at least 30 or so giant-sized trumpets. We took them home later that day to our share house. Before we got on it, we were confronted by I, one of the wisest Indian trippers you'll ever come across. He told us we were dumb fucks in a bid to deter us from the use of Datura. However, I did not give heed to his words of wisdom. Next thing I know, we put all 30 of the flowers in a giant pot and simmered it in boiling water over the stove until all the flowers looked like soggy spinach. The smell was pretty awkward. I sat in the kitchen watching the stuff boil, and I could have sworn I was actually getting dosed up on the fumes. I was stoned at the time, meaning my senses were most probably tweaked. My mates, C, R, B, and myself poured the tea into giant cups once it finished brewing. We moved to B's room because it was the warmest and sat around the sacred tea. I was afraid to drink it at first, but B, R, and C got right into it. About 20 minutes later, I was eventually pressured into sculling my share. Immediately after I sculled this shit, B began to talk about how uneasy he was feeling. 30 minutes later, B had already come all the way up. The Datura had taken away his ability to speak. He stood up and looked around the room with great concern. He was wobbling all around the place, unable to center his gravity, and speaking absolute gibberish, but gesturing as if he were expecting us to understand what he was saying. He pounced off his bed and ran around the room, knocking over bottles of piss, and then eventually slipping in his own puddle of piss. We thought it was hilarious, though we were slightly worried about his and our own well-being. Soon, this shit was going to take us by surprise, and we wouldn't be laughing for sure, but for the time being, it was quite humorous. 40 minutes in, I left B's room and went downstairs to the kitchen. I felt slightly euphoric and noticed that the natural lighting of the kitchen was unusually beautiful, almost as if I were in a warmly lit rainforest in dusk. I pieced out in the kitchen amongst the remaining fumes from the stew for a little bit, and then I decided to go back up the stairs and see how the other fellows were doing. As far as I was concerned, things were going well. Just as I was about to head up the stairs, bang! It hit me like a freight train. Motor receptors down. Climbing up those set of stairs was a fucking hard mission. I felt drunk and extremely uncoordinated. However, I didn't get that same headspin I get when you are drunk. It seemed like each premeditated step I took was certainly going to fail to move me to the spot I originally intended, and I was completely aware of it. However, there was no two ways of going about it. Predestined footsteps? I'm sure others who have experienced Datura may have the same feeling. I made it up the stairs eventually and carefully paced myself as I entered the room, trying my hardest not to fall in a puddle of piss myself. I really don't recall what happened for the next 3 hours, a bit like an amnesiac. I didn't quite black out. Time just disappeared, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting on the couch of the living room beside 2 mates of mine. I felt cold and itchy all over the place. There was a burning sensation deep inside my body. I couldn't figure out what was causing it or where exactly the pain was coming from. It was almost as if my anxiety levels had risen so fucking high that it had taken a form of a burning fire. It was agonizing and extremely discomforting. All of a sudden, I realized that I am actually stark naked on the couch. I and A are looking at me like I've gone fucking crazy. And for the time being, I had. Kim was on the other side of the room watching TV. She seemed not to notice what the fuck was going on. C walks into the living room later, with his eyes fixated at a random point in space. It was random as hell. Next thing I know, I whip out a cigarette that I distinctly remember leaving behind my ear. I began a quest in search for a lighter. I continuously search over and over the same square feet of carpet in front of me for a lighter, but I don't find one. Magically, I realize that my cigarette is already lit. Duh, I think to myself, and began smoking it. Moments later, it falls on the floor and I start searching for it, but it's gone. What the fuck? Take a wild guess what I do next. I reach behind the same ear and find another one. However, this doesn't seem to strike me as the slightest bit unusual. I just go on smoking it. Oh, of course, without lighting it first. Another blackout happens. A fraction of my memory is erased, and I find myself naked in bed, hiding under my cover sheets. I is telling me to put on my clothes, but I just tell him to fuck off and began to feel the incessant pain growing inside my body. I still have no idea, till this day, how to describe the pain. Or have I ever recalled feeling the same way on any other substance except for high doses of dimenhydrinate. Right about that time, Kim, being sober, decided to call the ambulance, for we had all become a bit like a bunch of zombies, with slightly worse motor function skills. The whole lot of us were stumbling around and crashing into everything. I do not recall any of this, but apparently there were 2 ambulances that arrived outside our house. 3 of us were put in one, and B and C hopped in the other one, or rather, were forced. I refused to get into the ambulance apparently, and kept dropping my shorts that were loosely bound to my waist. Our house is directly outside a busy street close to the city. My dick was probably shriveled like a worm because it was one fucking cold night. I woke up, or more or less, recollect the next conscious fraction of my memory from inside the ward of the hospital, being forced to drink this black tar-like ooze, later informed to be charcoal. I kept spilling that shit everywhere, mostly because it was fucking disgusting, and I thought every drop counted towards another drop less in my mouth. And every stain it left on the hospital bed made me curious as to what it was. I seriously thought one of the black spots on the bed sheets were my spectacles. I reached down to pick up my tiny spectacles only to realize it was just charcoal ooze. Then, I think I see a cigarette on my bed. On closer inspection, it turned out to be another black spot. I repeated this method over and over again until I finally finished the black stuff. A nurse arrives and takes a pen. She puts the pen on the tip of my index finger, and a sharp needle protrudes and sucks the blood out of my finger. I tell her to fuck off. She leaves soon after. I take a close look at my finger, but there were no blood stains, no needle entry visible. I began to wonder if the nurse was real. From this point onwards, things get really fucking weird. I get up off my bed and search through all my drawers on my study desk in my room at home in search for my glasses. No luck. So I turn around and rummage through my bedside table. I can't find them anywhere. All of a sudden, I realize that I am actually standing in front of the wall in the hospital while feeling up the plaster with my hands. The doctor comes around and sits me on the bed again and tells me to get some rest. I get up straight away and start running for no logical reason, but I stumble and make a scene while laying naked on the floor after my shorts dropped off in the process. I get aggressive and push past the doctors. That's when the security was called and a bunch of them crowd around me and force me back on my bed. I start throwing accusations at the doctors with no actual basis for about what seems to be 20 minutes. And continually resist their arrest with serious lack of coordination. I try to punch them all, but my arms feel like a floppy gelatinous rope. They overcome me with ease and throw me inside solitary and tell me they won't let me go for as long as it takes for me to settle the fuck down. They said if I don't make a scene for 15 minutes, they will take me out of solitary. The door shuts and then I begin to yell for what seems to be hours and hours. For a reason unknown. I began to search for a way out, like some sort of heroic escape artist. I look under the gap of the door and try to squeeze under it, but it doesn't work. I search under the bed for a secret trap door about a dozen times, but every time, I fail. And then I repeat the same process immediately afterwards. I try kicking the solid door a few dozen times until my bare feet are sore. I then think I found the way. I look up and notice the vent between the lights on the ceiling. I climb on top of the bed and jump like a monkey, trying to grab hold of the cheese grater-like vent. When that didn't work, I finally gave up hope and sat myself down on the bed. It felt like I had been inside there for years. My thoughts begin to race. I think that I have done some seriously bad crime, eaten the bad fruit, and this was my punishment. Solitary confinement for the rest of my existence, which to me at the time meant eternity. Those thoughts made me angry, so I yelled for a while until I felt tired and eventually settled in the bed. It was truly uncomfortable, almost like a bed of nails. I'd rest assured on a bed like that any other day, like a sleepy lion. The delirium begins to kick in hard at this point. My girlfriend at the time suddenly appears next to me. I begin to talk to her and tell her that I am so glad she is here for me. Quite sadly, our conversation is short-lasting, and her body dissolves and shrivels into the shape of a black furry object. I look closely and inspect it for a moment, then realize it was only my black jumper. The weird thing is, as soon as I convince myself that I am hallucinating, reality slowly evolves, as opposed to the opposite tendency in many normal, delirious states, where reality jumps out at me and then I register that I am hallucinating. Datura seems to grant me the potential to control my hallucinations to whatever I please. However, my mind registers information at a slower pace than visual observation, so I have to be super aware that I am under the influence of tropane alkaloids and that the hallucinations are just mind-induced in order to not be freaked out or more or less to enjoy the visual and metaphysical interaction. Soon after, another ghost of my past visits me, a good friend Andy. Andy doesn't say much because he normally doesn't say anything at all. He sat there on the bed looking at the ground, hardly noticing my presence, like he normally does. He always wears a black jumper. I call out to him as if he is on the other side of the road. He doesn't respond. As soon as I predict that he is just another hallucination, reality hits me like a very slow crawling turtle. This time, I predict his body is just going to shrivel up and turn into my furry black jumper again. And voila, I didn't even need to inspect it 3 times, learning all over again. Datura makes me feel a bit like a monkey placed in a scientific observation room undergoing a trial and error test, with Satan as the scientist. I lay down and stare at the clock on the other side of the room. It says it's 4:30. I'm rather confused as to whether or not it's early morning or late afternoon. Suddenly, it occurs to me that it is my mother's birthday and I must be somewhere at some time. Her birthday was really a week ago, but I forgot. I begin to pound at the door and yell at the passerbys through the small slit of the reinforced glass on the door. A police officer walks by, looks at me, then continues in his direction, and soon vanishes. Doctors, nurses, and many other official-looking staff pass the hall like it's rush hour in a busy street. They all vanish eventually, and I constantly fall for it, yelling at each and every one of them to let me out of the prison I was in. I look outside and there is a window. Outside, it is bright. Bright and clear daylight and nice bushy trees and flowers line the windows like a garden. I take a step back and look at the clock on the wall, but it's not there anymore. I scan my eyes around my 4-walled world and there is no clock, but now there is a television on the ceiling. The reception is blurry, and it takes moments for my eyes to focus, and eventually I realize that football is playing. The television hangs between 2 fluorescent lights on the roof. No grate there anymore. It vanishes after a bit of logic jumps in my head. My next delusion. My hospital band strapped around my wrist becomes a Falls Festival wristband, a yearly 3-day underground music festival that everyone in Tasmania goes to. I think I have been hospitalized after taking too many drugs during the concert at one point. I lay on the bed, sick and tired of my constant delusions and disappointment, and I watch the television screen. I find I am unable to achieve a peaceful state of mind, constantly twisting and turning and getting up. There appears another window in the room that I hadn't discovered yet. Through the window, there are many office workers sitting around computers, like some sort of a telemarketing business office. They all have headphones and speakers strapped to their heads and completely disregard my presence and my constant bashing on the window. It, of course, does not exist. I give up hope and wait for the end of days. The datura begins to wear off at this point, and then I suddenly realized that I am actually under the influence of Datura for the first time this evening. Time passes and I feel more stable, although I do smoke a couple more phantom cigarettes, stumble about, and maybe see a few more hallucinations. But finally, I regain myself, and the door of the hospital is opened. A lady walks in and tells me I can go in 15 minutes, and I just sit there crying. Something makes me really sad, but what? I do not know. I rendezvous with the other fools from my share house. They all look exhausted and majorly fucked. I ask them what time it is. C tells me it's 7:30 in the morning. The whole evening I was under the concept that it was still daytime and that I would make it to my mother's birthday, until I asked for the date and realized her birthday was a week ago. It gives me a bit of relief. Funny thing was, all three of us shared some of the same hallucinations, even though we were put in different wards, and I was confined in a solitary room. C, B, and myself all imagined the wristband was a false festival band, and also saw that same white clock on the wall that said 4:30. Quite scary, actually. C also mentioned that he received messages telekinetically, and heard me yell out to him and his friend B, even though there was no possible way of him being able to hear me from that far. This drug is super strange. I am writing this in the hopes that it will prevent someone else from severe injury. This is not a report of how I am affected by the drug Datura, but my nephew, who is in very, very bad shape. My 16-year-old nephew is currently in ICU and still, after 36 hours, is incoherent and nearly comatose. He hasn't recognized any family members or his surroundings since this started. His pupils are dilated nearly the size of dimes. He is apparently living in hell, as demonstrated by his horrified facial expressions of bulging eyes and uncontrollable trembling. He is continually doing sporadic mumblings with paranoid darting eyes and scanning around the room, looking at what we can only imagine. It is very obvious that he is experiencing true terror and horrific scenes of a hallucination. His heart rate is hovering around 115 to 130 beats per minute, and his mouth is coated with blood. He is shaking, agitated, and in restraints, which he got out of and tried to pull the catheter out of his penis, which would have resulted in severe injuries did he not get stopped in time. For the first 9 hours of his high, we were in the dark about what could be the cause of this. Ambulance drivers, fire chief, police, all said it was drugs, but the test results all came back negative. This all led the doctors to believe that this was neurological, and my nephew was taken for a CAT scan, where results still came back negative. We all feared the worst: brain damage, aneurysm, etc. Every terrifying thought came to mind. All family members were called in the middle of the night, where we all rushed to the emergency room. We cried, worried, and prayed. The younger children witnessed this chaos and won't soon forget. If you want to try this drug, please consider what the effects of this on others will be. A $20,000 hospital bill, ICU for days, CAT scan, ambulance, and specialists. Please take warning. We can't determine how much he took, as a plant with 4 pods were found in his room. We still don't know if he will pull out okay or not. The doctors cannot say if there will be any long-term effects. We are so worried. My Datura experience can't be described in just a few words. It's a very intense drug. You completely lose touch with reality. It's something I did once and will never do again. Datura is nothing short of a deadly poison. Me and a friend found Datura growing in his front yard. We tried drying and smoking the leaves, which gave a slight sleepy and disoriented feeling. Not satisfied with these results, we decided to ingest it. We broke open 5 seed pods, each which contained about 200 seeds, and crushed them in a mortar and a pestle. This turned into a gloppy paste. We then boiled it and strained it, which we jokingly named moon tea. I'm not sure of the amount we took. I'm guessing 4 cups each. Nevertheless, we split the tea in half and guzzled it. The last thing I remember is falling asleep in my friend's driveway. Yeah, in the gravel. Tony, my friend, and I were hallucinating to the extreme and laughing uncontrollably at everything. I told Tony I was going home, but instead, I followed him into his house and sat down on the living room couch. I switched back and forth between chairs and couches. Then, I began screaming at Tony's parents, saying things like, "I need something to crush my drugs on," and "Lynn, where's my razor blade?" Tony's father asked what I was doing, and I replied smugly, "I'm discussing court matters with your son." I began unscrewing salt and pepper shakers and dumped them out on the floor, giggling. Datura is a deliriant. In your mind, you're acting completely normal, but nothing you do makes any sense at all. There's no way to control yourself when you're tripping. Less than an hour after we ingested it, Tony and I were taken to Medina General Hospital. My dad literally had to drag me inside the emergency room. I was yelling, I'm fine," and laughing feverishly. We waited 45 minutes before I was wheeled to a hospital room. It took a doctor and 3 nurses to strap me to my hospital bed, where they stuck 5 IVs in my forearm, put electrodes all over me, and hooked me up to an EKG machine. My heartbeat was 180, my breathing 3 times faster than normal. They undressed me and made me wear a backless hospital gown. The only time they unstrapped my legs and arms was when I went to the bathroom. I ran out into the hallway with my ass hanging out and 1 sock on. The nurses basically tackled me and strapped me back to the bed. All that time, I had no idea what was going on. I was totally in my own world. To absorb the poison in my system, they forced me to drink liquid charcoal. Tony was in the hospital room next to me. He actually cooperated and drank his charcoal. Let me tell you, it is the most disgusting thing I have ever tasted in my life. I had no idea at the time that it was liquid charcoal. I was hallucinating so badly, I thought it was Tony making me chug a bottle of Jägermeister. They finally sedated me after I spit it out in the nurse's face. I left the hospital the next day at 1 p.m. I was still fucked up. On the car ride home, I could swear that a jogger waved at me through the car window, but when I looked back, it was only a mailbox. When I arrived home, I had charcoal crusted everywhere on my body, my hair, face, arms, legs, even in my ears, and my pupils were fully dilated. I almost died that night in the hospital. I could keep rambling on about the insane stuff Tony and I saw, but I won't. To be perfectly honest, I can't remember everything that happened. Datura completely erased it from my memory. I can recall bits and pieces, but the rest, people have told me. If you plan to try Datura, proceed with extreme caution.
This story is from Chris. The story is called I Pissed Myself, and the drug that was taken was Datura. One day, a good friend of mine named Dave told me that he had Datura and that I tripped nuts. Me, at the time, already had experience with spirit walk, snurf, or snuffadelic pills, etc. Was more than obliged to take him up on this offer. I had tripped many times and loved it. I went to his house sometime in the evening. He had ordered a large baggie of Datura leaves off the internet. I'd say around 9 p.m. or so, we ground up a good 12 grams or more into a semi-fine powder. We then got some Lipton tea bags and emptied the contents and replaced them with our Datura powder. We boiled the bags in the water until it was a dark green, like he had read on the web. We poured 1 glass apiece and chugged the gut-wrenching tea down, doing our best to ignore the horrible smell and taste. Writing about it makes me sick, it's so bad. After about 30 minutes or so, We just felt like we were really drunk, so I decided to drink another glass, but only finished half of it. Bad idea, people. Another 20 minutes flew by, and I realized that I felt like there was not the least a bit of moisture in my mouth or throat. It was very hard to swallow, and I felt like I had to urinate very badly, but as most reports conclude, only drips follow the have-to-pee sensation. We decided to go into Dave's room to listen to some good old mindless self-indulgence, which happens to be fucking awesome music to listen to while tripping or just straight stoned. He sat at his desk chair in front of his computer, and I sat at another desk chair a few feet away. As I silently enjoyed music, I began to notice a scratching sound close to my head. I turned to see Dave's zombified iguana, with blood pouring from its mouth, perched on the back of my chair. FYI, Dave's iguana died a week prior to this day. Not remembering I was tripping, I ran from his room across the hall into the bathroom, smack into the wall near the sink. I got up and looked in the mirror, and the sight of my own face made me laugh uncontrollably. I then left the bathroom and walked into the living room where Dave's sister was having a little get-together with her friends. They were unaware I was on anything until I ran up to one of her friends and fell to the floor 2 feet in front of them because my legs suddenly gave out as I was running. I got up and sat on the couch and thought I was fishing. I know this only because of the eyewitness accounts. Haha, I don't remember fishing. I then got up, not sure how much time I took to fish, but I remember making my way into his driveway to see a platoon of modern-day US soldiers scouting his yard. I brushed it off, not thinking anything odd about it. I walked to my car to find my 14-year-old brother, who wasn't even in the same city at the time, in my driver's seat. I got all pissy and demanded that he get the hell out of my car, but he just sat there staring out the window, so I told him I was gonna go tell my mom, who wasn't there either. I proceeded to the front door of Dave's house and took one last look back to see that my car door was open but no one was in it. So I got in my car and tried to start it, only to break my key off in the ignition. At that exact moment, I didn't give a shit. I got out, shut the door, and went back inside and went to the bathroom to piss. I managed to urinate successfully, yet I imagined that I unzipped and all. I pissed my pants and then just stood in front of his toilet until his older brother barged in to find me soaked in my own urine. He asked me what happened, and knowing what I did, I for some reason told him that somebody threw a beer on me. Long story short, I ended up finally falling asleep and awoke the next day at 10 a.m. when I was supposed to be at work at 9. I went to work late thinking the trip was over, only to spend my first 3 hours at work talking to coworkers that didn't work that day and customers about random problems I had going on at that time. My manager realized I was on something and sent me home. Needless to say, I should have been smart like Dave and read up on this shit before doing it. I've done it 3 or 4 more times since, only to do even crazier shit, but I've typed entirely too much as it is. So I hope what I've written thus far is educational in some twisted way. P.S. Breaking my key off in the ignition was probably the worst of this particular trip, but I've had extremely way worse events occur during the later Datura trips. Even though I've done it a total of 5 or 6 times, I refuse to ever do it again because of the things that have happened while on it. This story is from Disco. The story is called Clawed by a Giant Eagle. The drugs used, Datura and cannabis. 4 of us, me, my boyfriend Ricky, Bevan, and Jeff, were staying at a beach house in a relatively remote location on the west coast of New Zealand. We spent the entire day sleeping, chilling, running around, and carving the beautiful blue waves. So we decided what better way to end the day than with a nice sesh on the porch. So out came 2 tinnies worth of weed, the bong, and the lighters. I'd had about 4 potent hits when I felt nicely mellowed out, and decided to stop there. We'd eaten quite a bit that evening, lots of fresh fruit from a nearby orchard, and barbecued fish, so our stomachs were by no means empty. Ricky brought 8 Datura seed pods with him, each containing between 80 to 100 seeds. Since there were 4 of us, 2 people would have to babysit, while the other 2 could pop some seeds. Although I'm nearly 6 foot, being a chick, there was no way I could restrain any of the guys if the need came, so I was the one of the seed poppers. Jeff had never done Datura before, so he was a natural choice too. Besides, Ricky and Bevan were more than happy to keep their lips around the bong and laugh their asses off at us. 7 p.m. I opened 2 seed pods, one for me, one for Jeff, and we swallowed down the seeds. Prior to this experience, I'd done Datura 3 times but never had over 60-ish seeds in one sitting, so I decided I was ready to experience with a bit more and explore deeper. 8 p.m. We spent the next hour talking shit and eating marshmallows with no clear effects setting in yet, so I popped another 50 seeds. Big mistake. Apart from the effects of the weed, I felt completely normal. I could stand and walk fine and hold a slightly slurred but coherent conversation. 8:15 p.m. After another 15 minutes, I started feeling increasingly warm. Despite it being chilly night, my body was radiating a huge amount of heat. This is when the hallucination started. I felt like I was sunbathing. Though it was dark by now, I felt the sun envelope my body and drizzle it with golden rays of warmth. It felt divine. Everything was warm, loving, and inviting. Apparently by now I was down to my bra and knickers. My heart rate increased dramatically. I knew it was kicking in. 9 p.m. I was smoking a spliff, which didn't exist, and dropped it, which I read is very common in Datura use, so I crawled around looking for it, to no avail. I figured it must have somehow fallen through the floorboards of the porch. Though that was technically impossible, I stepped off the porch and lay on the grass below, gazing at the stars. I felt like me and the stars were one. We were the same. I don't know why, but I particularly remember this feeling of belonging with these giant balls of burning gas. To me, they were tangible diamonds in the sky, and I was too. I could see for billions of miles into the sky. It was one enormous eternity of stars in patterned clusters. Although I was definitely hallucinating, everything felt intensely real. My mind felt normal, although my speech was slightly slurred and my walk was a little crooked. I felt something crawling under my ass as I lay on the grass. So I moved and saw a pool of earwigs weaving in and out of the earth that was once under my bum. I hate bugs, so I frantically rolled down the slight decline of grass onto the sand. This was the last thing I clearly remember. Everything else is as told by Ricky, Bevan, and my faint memories, and the camera footage taken that night. This is also where things started going wrong. I felt insatiable thirst, and like I was stranded. I was yelling out for help, but only a mumble of jumbled words came out. I wasn't making any sense. I spent a good hour playing in the sand, throwing shells, and rolling around. I picked up the sand with my hand and watched it drop. I was memorized by its sheer awesomeness. I vaguely remember feeling like I was in a desert, and I felt intense fear and paranoia. Nothing seemed safe. The sun still felt as if it was beaming down delicious rays of heat. I was crawling on the sand, thirsty, desperate. I remember hearing sharp, loud noises and feeling so shit by now. I needed water. I needed to piss. I needed to throw up. And I needed to get out of this horrible, desolate place. I could only see things that were around 10 meters away. Everything else faded into a bright light. I still have flashbacks and experience this at times. It felt like hours and hours had passed, but it was actually only 20 minutes. I don't know what went on in my head during that time, but it was frightening. I remember images of bright red giant bolts, far larger than a house. I've experienced this Red Bull hallucination many times before. 30 meters from me, the ocean roared. I heard the sound of water and wanted to run towards it, dive into this pool of infinity and swallow water forever. Without warning, I snapped onto my feet and ran like a bullet, dodging obstacles which didn't exist as I ran towards the water. Ricky was only 10 or so meters away from me when I suddenly jolted. I heard heavy, loud footsteps behind me going faster than me. To me, the water was safety. I was being chased, and the water was my only chance of survival. I managed to run into the shallows of the water when I felt sharp claws dig into my bare flesh from behind, and a force throw me onto the wet sand behind me. I must have thought it was a giant eagle or a vulture, because I kept screaming at Ricky, calling him a stupid fucking bird, and tried grabbing his beak and hold it shut. I was moving frantically, trying to escape his grasp, but I couldn't. He lay on top of me, holding me down for 30-odd minutes. My screaming had turned to tears, and my kicking and punching had turned to scratching and hair pulling. I had very little control over my body. Everything just happened without my mind's permission. I was on autopilot. I was so scared, so helpless, so alone, and so vacant. I had no idea where Jeff, Bevan, or Ricky were. They vanished long ago. I called for them several times throughout my experience, but they never appeared to come. My mind was gone. Everything seemed incredibly real, and I found it impossible to separate reality from fantasy, because as far as I knew, everything was real. Ricky carried and dragged me into the beach house and held me up in the shower. I was an absolute mess, physically and emotionally. I could no longer stand properly and would sway from side to side begging it to stop. The water burned. It felt like it was sizzling as it ran down my back, but I gave into it and let it burn and melt me away. I literally felt like I was going down the drain. I thought the grains of sand being washed off my skin were pieces of me, swirling down, being carried by the burning acid water deep down into the drain as if they meant nothing. I vomited 4 times with 30-second minute intervals between each. I stressfully started talking about being literally turned inside out, and again, I begged for it to stop. I let it all happen with no physical fight. It was a hugely frightening experience. I was making funny groaning noises, my skin turned white, my eyes were open, and my pupils filled my entire iris. I suddenly noticed Ricky in the shower holding me up. He looked different to how I remember. Far older and getting bigger and bigger the more I looked at him. I remember seeing my nose in the bottom corner of both eyes, which appeared to grow too. I could barely concentrate on anything, but his eyes managed to pierce right through me. Ricky dried me off and put me into bed. The entire room was spinning and turning upside down. Even though I'd barfed everything out, I still felt the need to vomit. I was hanging off the bed, rolling around and singing to myself. The music I heard, which was all in my head, was the most complex, incredible thing I have ever heard. I thought of it like a skyscraper, layer upon layer upon layer, jammed together to create this mind-blowing fusion of beats and notes. I can't explain how amazing it was. It was my calm in the storm. But now it was around 4 a.m. and I was over the worst. I was so exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I was incredibly restless, tossing and turning constantly. A figure appeared and I talked to it. I was actually talking to myself and speaking both parts of the conversation. I remember drifting in and out of reality. There were moments when I thought I was going mad, and other times I managed to convince myself it was just a dream. I still didn't know where I was or how I got there, but the feeling of threat was no longer present. I must have fallen asleep where I had the most amazing dream, which can't possibly be real. It was pretty X-rated, so I probably shouldn't go into any detail. I remember reading a book in my mind. I knew all the words. I then gradually woke up, but was still reading this book in my head. I had massive cuts and bruises all over my body, which were actually just minor scrapes. So yes, I was still having hallucinations. I remember everything which happened from here on out. I somehow managed to believe my mouth was on my forehead, so when I tried to drink a glass of water, it all poured down my face. I would drift in and out of reality and imagination every so often, but by now, I knew things I saw weren't real. The rest of the story is fairly boring and uneventful, but the main effects of the Datura lasted around 24 hours. I had difficulty understanding basic things, yet I could understand incredibly complex things in my head. Even now, 2 months after, I sometimes still see everything around me fade into a white light. As I said earlier, I've experimented with Datura before, but this was the first and last time I'll have 150 seeds. I'd enjoyed it in the past, but I definitely won't be doing it ever again. Although my account of what happened may not sound so scary to the reader, I cannot emphasize enough how truly frightening this experience was. I felt so incredibly shit throughout the experience and for a day or two after. Not only had I managed to make a total ass out of myself, I could have very easily drowned as well. In the past, I've also done LSD several times. The thing that I both love and hate about Datura is that I really can't separate reality from hallucinations. However, on acid, I knew I was seeing things that didn't exist. I'll definitely take acid again, but I'll never swallow another Datura seed in my life. This story comes from Lawrence. The story is called A Dimension I Never Want to Return To. When one of my dealers told me I had to try Datura the summer of my freshman year, I was skeptical. I was working a lifeguarding job and needed to stay sharp. I could be called into action at any moment. He assured me that it wouldn't be a problem. He was wrong. He gave me one pod and told me that half would be sufficient. Being an experienced psychonaut, I figured I would take the whole pod. It took about an hour till I felt anything. After about 90 minutes, I began to feel very dizzy and lethargic, like being too drunk. I took a fat dab to try to stabilize, but felt nothing. I just fell asleep. When I awoke, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Everything was blurry, but I was sure I was in an oven. I was really sweaty, and my elbows felt locked. I felt like I really had to relieve myself, but couldn't find the bathroom because I was blind. After about 15 minutes, my vision started to clear up and I could see. I tried to get off the couch, but I felt like I left my hands behind and my legs could barely move. With incredible effort, I rolled off the couch and began to crawl into the bathroom. I pulled myself onto the toilet and tried to defecate. I felt incredible relief until I looked into the bowl and there was nothing there. I tried again, and like I was leaking. When I looked in the toilet again, the water had turned to blood. No matter how much I wiped, the toilet paper always came up bloody. As I left the bathroom, I looked into the mirror and saw my father. I knew I shouldn't talk to him then, so I left. When I entered my living room, I could see that some friends had come over. The only problem was, they had all died. Blood was flowing out of all their orifices. It was horrifying, and I ran into my room. I tried to go online, but wouldn't turn on. Frustrated, I went to my desktop, but couldn't remember my password. I just wanted to listen to some music, but all I could do was shake my computer. I ran past the party in my living room and out the front door. I looked in the sky, and all I could see was green gas. I was sure it was making me insane, so I got into my car and just sat there for what could have been years. The next thing I remember, I was back in my house talking to my friend. She kept asking me if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. It was like no matter how loud I screamed, nothing would come out. Then my vision went blurry again, and I might have passed out. I awoke in what only could be called hell itself. It was like I had entered a dimension of pure agony. The floor covered in vomit 2 feet deep, and blood was gushing from my underwear. I waded to the bathroom to find that my dad had left Mir. He was yelling at a younger version of myself, telling me that I would never be as successful as my brother, who recently died of Giardia. I tried to pull down my pants to clean up the blood, but I realized I wasn't wearing anything. The only thing, I had a vagina. I am a man. I was ashamed in front of my father and began to weep until I realized I was just crying on the floor of my bathroom. I decided I need some water, so I turned on the sink, but no matter what, the water was scalding. I remember when my brother was really sick, everything, even ice water, felt burning hot to him. It was like I was inhibiting his soul and it felt good. I left the bathroom and my friends had turned into piles of rocks. I tried to piece them back together, but I couldn't hold on to anything. It felt like my hands were covered in grease. Needless to say, the rest of the night was something out of a dimension of an unimaginable nightmares. Sometime around 5 a.m. I started to come down. My vision was fuzzy and I kept seeing something moving in the corner of my vision. I went to sleep for a few hours and woke up relatively okay. The road to recovery has been long, but I'm hopeful that with the continued help of antipsychotics, I will in time be able to overcome the trauma I experienced on Datura. I would not recommend Datura to even the most experienced trippers. What I saw can only be described as my own worst nightmare.
So I was about 19 to 20 years old. I grabbed a couple plants out of a cornfield during the fall. I came home and put some leaves in a strainer and boiled it for about 10 minutes. Then I let it sit on a low temperature for about another 7 to 8 minutes. It was done. I'm still young and highly uneducated about this plant. I've just heard that it was a crazy experience, an experience that I clearly was not ready for. And yes, witches used a concentrated version of this plant, made it into an ointment, and would cover a broomstick with it and insert it into their vagina. That's where the modern witch riding a broomstick comes from. Anyway, the last pot was a dark amber. The first two were lightly colored, almost looked like urine. And so I drank about 2 small cups of the first 2 brews, and I decided to drink the amber one. That's when stuff starts getting weird. The sky turns purple. I can't read the clocks anymore. The numbers were changing and looked like they had mold on them. So I called my friend because I needed a ride to pick up some Xanax and a bottle of codeine syrup in case anything went wrong. I took a few Xanax and drank the syrup to calm down. He told me I was talking to people in the back seat that weren't there. I said, "Ha ha, gnarly dude," as I suddenly snapped back into reality for a split second. Then I'm out there again, smoking imaginary cigarettes. I come home and go downstairs to lay down. This is when I realized I may have taken too much. I dropped a cigarette I thought I was smoking and realized I never was. Okay, this is getting kinda boring, so I'm gonna keep it short and sweet. I believe I may have gone to sleep for a little while. I wake up and I'm inside a bar talking to people. We're having a great time until it all goes black and I'm back inside my basement. My sense of reality is gone. I slightly remember talking to someone who said that they were dead. Freaked me out a little bit. So I go upstairs and start talking about going to dinner with the president and said I need to get dressed. My parents said, "What?" Thinking I was just joking, but they told me when they looked in my eyes, they had never seen a look so lost, so gone, and so insane. I tried to put shoes in the microwave to turn them into Pop-Tarts. Oh God. After my mom stopped me from that, she told me she loves me and didn't know what I was on, so I had to leave the house and go sleep it off in my car. I said, okay. So I'm chilling in my car when all of a sudden, a fucking hearse pulls up. Out of the hearse comes a witch. Following her are a gang of short black demon-looking creatures. The witch was about 7 feet tall, black, and misty, like the blackest black with the pure black mist waving off of her. I see all this through my rear view mirror, and when I step outside, I still see them coming. Then they disappear into my parents' car. I walk up and talk to them. I said I'm in trouble. I just got kicked out, and I can't have any friends over. The witch looks at me and says in a demonic, manly voice,
"Our time has not come yet."
This is when I lose my shit. I break open the shed door and grab some gasoline and a baseball bat. I yell to my family to get the gun because they're trying to steal the car. I start throwing gas all over the car with a lighter in hand. They are in, and it seemed like they were giggling. My dad comes outside and starts screaming, "Where the fuck are they? The cops are on the way." I said, "In the car, look." They were gone. The police show up and say, "Drop the bat," to which I complied. I snapped back into reality, realized I had taken that stuff about 2 to 3 days ago. The cops asked me what happened, and all I could think to say was that a gang of pickpockets were trying to steal my car. They asked me if I was sober, and I said yes. used a flashlight to look into my eyes and said, "Well, no one's here." I apologized and they left. My parents told me I could sleep in the garage. I said, okay. Luckily, I still have some emergency Xanax, so I took them. I knocked on the door later and asked if I could come in because mice were all over the floor. They said, "I love you, but not tonight. We will talk in the morning." Eventually, I went to sleep. My sweet mother found all the pictures of Jimson tea and flushed them, hugged me, and said, "Never again. Do you know what you tried to do?" I looked down and said, "Yes." I followed up with "The devil ain't no man or female." I think I might have seen the devil or some high-up demon. Had sleep paralysis a few days later. Do not try this shit if you are not a pure psychonaut or a shaman. Things could have gotten really bad. I could have lost my life or burned down a car. This is nothing to mess with. It's not like a psychedelic, it's a deliriant. Anyone else brave or stupid enough to try this plant? My advice, don't. First of all, I would like to let you all know that this is not a party drug. This is a very powerful, very poisonous plant. It is nothing at all like acid, and yes, it can kill you in a variety of ways. I had almost total amnesia after this experience. This report is compiled of things I have remembered over the past 3 years. Kessler and I have both been diagnosed as schizophrenic in the past year. Is it coincidence, or did the Datura have something to do with it? One night in early October of 2001, I was house sitting at my friend Cassie's house in downtown Savannah. My friend Kessler was there house sitting too. We were just sitting around, smoking and drinking a little bit. Cassie and her roommates were at a rave in South Carolina. Eventually, we fell asleep. The crew arrived home early the next morning. We were sitting around passing the bong around, talking and stuff. Cassie gave Kessler and I a small bag full of black seeds in a crimson liquid. I had no idea what they were, and neither did Kessler. Cassie explained to us that it was Jimson weed. I still had no idea. Neither of us had ever heard of it. I was a stupid kid, so I didn't even research it. Cassie told me that it was enough to make about 5 people trip nuts. Now, Kessler and I were psychonauts, so we thought her definition of tripping nuts was probably a bit different than ours. So we just divided the seeds in half and ate them. I'd say we each had about 70 fat, juicy seeds, and we each drank the liquid, whatever that was. I had done acid, ecstasy, DMT, and a lot of other stuff before this point, but nothing could prepare me for the world that I was about to enter. I guess this would be a good place to explain something. The hallucinations from Datura are very strong. They are very bizarre, but seem natural. What I mean is, everything is very, very odd, but seems real. More real than reality, if that makes any sense to you. Kessler and I waited for about an hour or two, and still weren't feeling it. We went to my house and chilled out there for a while. We were starting to get very tired. We decided to go back to Cassie's house so we could stay up. We got there and we were feeling very drunk by this time. Drunker than I've ever been. And I've been pretty drunk. I fell asleep on Cassie's couch. When I awoke, I was feeling even more drunk. I couldn't even stand up. My girlfriend at the time, Beth, drove me home. I don't remember, but she said that on the way home, I kept on taking my lighter out of the dash and trying to hit it like it was a pipe. But when I arrived home, that's when it hit me really hard. I went into my bedroom and got online to check my email. Suddenly, I saw a miniature version of myself walk out of my monitor. He sat down at my computer desk and started talking to me. We had a very deep conversation about life, love, and many other things. Then, he told me that I needed to go get some water. I went to the bathroom and filled a cup up with water and a bottle cap for my little friend. When I looked in the mirror, it wasn't me that I saw. It was a bloody mess. My face was mutilated beyond recognition. I started washing my face, but the more I washed, the bloodier it seemed to get. After about an hour, the blood just disappeared and I was able to recognize myself again. I went back to the room and my little friend was gone. I heard a knock at the front door as soon as I got back to my room. I went to go see who it was, and when I opened the door, I was in for a surprise. I think that everyone I had ever known was there, even people I had forgotten all about. This makes me think that Datura has the power to unlock forgotten memories. I let the hundreds of people in and we all went to my room, which is strange because I had a very small room, but everyone was there. I was talking to and catching up with everyone. People kept on disappearing and reappearing in random places in my room. People also kept dying, decaying, and eventually disappearing. I was so worried, but soon forgot all about it. There was also this guy with a Chick-fil-A cup as a head. He would keep dying, decaying, and coming back to life. I tried to kick everyone out, but I couldn't seem to get the Chick-fil-A guy to leave. Every time I tried to pick up the bones, they would turn to sand. He would then be reborn from the sand. I was getting really pissed off and quite freaked out. My friend Superman appeared from somewhere and helped me out. He tried to pick up the bones and they turned to sand. So he pulled a broom out from somewhere and swept the guy out of the front door. Superman came back to my room dragging a large cross. He talked to me as he proceeded to crucify himself. When he was completely hung up on the cross, he started to become very disfigured. He then exploded into ashes. I was horrified. What had happened to my friend? I gathered the ashes up in a dustpan and took them into the kitchen sink. I dumped the ashes into the sink and ran water on them. A new Superman grew up right out of my sink. He thanked me for bringing him to life, and then hazily left. I decided to go for a walk, and I saw my car in the parking lot, and it was wrecked very badly. I was upset. I went over and tried to open the door, but the whole car melted at my touch. Then I leaned up against a tree, and the tree melted. I figured out that I had the power to melt things just by touching them. Then, I had the idea to touch myself. I did, and nothing happened. I got very lost, and it took me hours to realize that I was just in the parking lot in front of my apartment. I wanted to go back inside, but I couldn't. I had locked the door and already had melted my keys on accident. The power eventually went away, so I used my ID to try to break into my house. I couldn't do it. I walked away and found my keys back in their solid state. I used my keys and let myself in. I soon noticed that my ID was missing. I'll explain close to the end. I went to take a shower, and when I got my clothes off, I noticed I had no sexual organs at all. I was freaked out, but I figured there was nothing I could do about this. I got in the shower and started to wash. When I got out of the shower and went back into my room, there was a 7-foot-tall totem pole staring at me. The totem pole was my CD tower. We had a conversation, then the strangest thing happened. Time started to slow down, slower and slower, until it eventually stopped. Everything around me was suspended in time. My cat was frozen. My totem pole, who was just talking to me just a minute ago, was now frozen in time, with his mouth open in mid-sentence. This was very strange. Eventually, time came back. Remember, it all seemed very natural at the time. Beth had come over to check on me. We were sitting there talking for hours, and as we talked, I slowly began to come down. The telephone rang, and I went to go pick it up. It was Beth. How was this possible? I looked over at the Beth on my bed, and she began to fade into nothing, waving at me as she went. This was the last major hallucination that I had on Datura. About my ID that had come up missing. I was so messed up on the Datura that I was trying to break into the wrong house. The next day, I got a knock at the door. It was the lady who lived in apartment 703. She told me that she had found my ID in her door. I wasn't even going to try to explain. The after effects of this stuff are wicked. I couldn't see anything clearly for about a week. I also felt strange for almost a month. It was like a month-long acid trip. I was having minor hallucinations for weeks. So last summer I decided to harvest some seeds from a Datura plant growing in my backyard. I knew that Datura was a deliriant and that it could be potentially deadly. It was a risk I was willing to take, out of curiosity. By the way, I was alone for some of it. So on January 19th on Saturday, I ate 5 seeds at around 10:30 p.m., just chewed them up and swallowed them down with some water. They didn't taste bad actually, very nutty though. So all I can really remember in order was my first night on it. The next day just seemed like a big mess of craziness and hell. At 10:40, I started feeling nauseous, real shitty, and body is restless. It feels like I really need to stretch. At 11:10, I started feeling really dazed, like I'm stuck in a daydream of a memory, and I can't really get out. I forgot what I'm even doing in the real world. At 11:30, my house became really, really huge. I had to get up to go to the bathroom, and I instantly became distracted by something in my living room. I almost pissed myself. This is when I lost track of time, or I just stopped looking at the clock. The rest of the events are just memories of this particular night. I can't remember what order they happened, so bear with me. I logged on to the Shroomery chat room and told people what I was on. This was the only time I felt really grounded, no major hallucinations. I was still able to carry out a cohesive conversation with some of the other people. I felt pretty much normal. I started to hear people chatting behind me, so I turned around. It was my friends. They all came to hang out with me at my house. So I went and sat with them, and we talked and joked around for a little while. Then I went to the kitchen to grab some drinks for them, and when I returned, they were gone. At first, I was disappointed that they ditched me. I remember even telling myself, those fuckers ditched me. Fuck them. Then I remembered that I was on Datura, and they must have been a hallucination. I got really scared for a moment, and then I completely forgot they were ever there, and that I was on Datura. I remember being in the kitchen and random objects were appearing in my hand. First, a cigarette was in my hand, and I went to go take a puff. When I put my hand up to my mouth, it was gone. I didn't think anything of it. Then, there was a Coke can. I went to go take a drink, and it was gone. I didn't mind at all. I remember walking around my pool table hundreds of times, just thinking about the past. My memories had become so vivid that I was pretty much blinded by them. This felt really good. After a while of coming back and forth into the Shroomery chat room, I thought the Datura was starting to wear off, so I decided to go to bed. I actually fell asleep really fast. The next day, I woke up really early. I looked down and I was covered in hundreds of maggots. Please note at this time, I had no idea that the Datura was still on. I felt 100% normal, even though I saw hundreds of maggots on me. I did not mind the maggots at all. I just told myself, well, they'll go away eventually. So I jumped in the shower and tried to scrub them off. I remember seeing them fall on the shower floor and go down the drain. When I got out, they were back on my skin. I went downstairs and tried to eat some breakfast, but my food was also covered in maggots. I told my dad and he was like, well, just throw it away and try again later. In real life, he did not say this. At some point in the day, my dad was gone, and something told me to go look for him. So I jumped into my truck and started driving around town. Within minutes of leaving my own neighborhood, I was completely lost and could not recognize anything. I started to panic and started turning down random roads. All of a sudden, my cousin was in the passenger seat. He was trying to help me find my way back home, but when it was time to give directions, he disappeared. So I was like, fuck, how am I gonna find my way back home now? Then, my friend Jerome was in the truck, along with my friend Chris, who was in the back seat. I tried asking them how do I get home, but they kept telling me that they don't know where my house is at. I kept lighting up cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. I had an endless amount of cigarettes, and I needed them because I was stressing the fuck out. After a while, my friends were gone, and I was alone. It was dark now, and I still had no idea where I was. I turned down a road that looked like my old trailer park, except it was deserted. There were no trailers in the park. The road was populated by hundreds of weeds, and I was coming to a dead end. I felt a hand grab my neck, and I stopped the truck. I looked around for a while and decided to turn around. Once I turned out of the park, I was able to recognize where I was. I found my way home and went directly up to my room. Now apparently, in reality, when I got home, my parents were freaking out and they started yelling at me. They knew I was tripping on something and they told me to go into my room and not come out until I was sober. I have no recollection of this at all. In my mind, I went home and nobody was there. At some point during the night, I was sitting at my computer desk. Big bugs were crawling on me, and I still didn't know I was hallucinating until I saw something on my computer desk. One of the wooden panels on my computer desk turned into a TV screen. It had full color, audio, and I could actually feel it. There was something about this TV screen and what was playing on it that told me that I was actually hallucinating. So now I know that I'm hallucinating, and I know that it's the Datura. I started to freak out badly, and I crawled into bed and forced myself to go to sleep. The next day, I woke up at around 2 p.m. My body ached, my head ached, my mouth was dry, and my eyes were in pain. I sat up and looked around and sort of asked myself, is it over? I looked at my arms, no maggots. I looked around my room, no phantom people. After I was sure that I was no longer hallucinating, I went back to sleep and then woke up later around 4 p.m. There was a lot more stuff that I'm sure happened. I just can't remember all of it. Datura is definitely a fucking insane drug. I highly recommend that everyone stays away from it. It is definitely not something you would do to feel good. It is just a neurological poison with no other purpose but to fuck you up. But I'm really glad I experienced it and lived through it. Definitely something I can brag about. I did something most people will never, ever experience or are too afraid to experience.